Hey everyone, you're tuned in to Staying Home, your revolutionary guide to the Green New Deal. I'm Josh Fox. Today we're going to talk about something that is mildly controversial, and I don't even know if it works or it doesn't work, but it seems to be an interesting concept that will probably need to withstand a great deal more academic and scientific rigor. The idea of climate restoration, the idea that we can take the carbon back out of the atmosphere. A lot of, I think, climate campaigners don't like to talk about this idea because it assumes that we have dominion and control over the entire planet, that we can put carbon into the atmosphere and we can take it back out again. And that sort of could lead to some rather dangerous assumptions when it comes to geoengineering and so forth. However, I do believe that my guest, Rick Parnell of the Foundation for Climate Restoration, has good intentions, and he's talking about the idea that we should be taking the carbon back out of the atmosphere, that we should be trying to reverse some of the effects of climate change, although it's not clear exactly if we can get the glaciers to refreeze or if we can get the weather patterns to change back or we can have less heat in the oceans in the summertime. It does seem, though, that creating some sense of I would think about this as sort of gardening for the planet, right? When you go out there and you go out into nature, nature is actually not left best alone, in my view. Nature and man are co-creators. Nature and people have a symbiotic relationship where when we go out into the landscape and we cultivate plants that are beneficial to us and beneficial to other species, we are part of nature. We are not separate from nature, right? A lot of people think nature should be left alone and human beings should have nothing to do with it. Well, in this case, it's kind of too late for that. We have invasive species everywhere. We have commingling of so many different ecosystems and biospheres on the planet that we do need to have some sense of, how do we best manage what we're doing, best manage our partnership with the planet, human beings, and all the other biodiversity that's out there. We have to create space for biodiversity. So why wouldn't we create a sense of management of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? Why wouldn't we manage greenhouse gas emissions and get them fine-tuned to such a point that we are essentially restoring the Holocene, restoring the carbon dioxide count in the atmosphere that we know gave rise to the birth of civilization, 10,000 years of climactic stability. So it's a really fascinating question as to whether or not we should not just stop climate emissions, but do things to turn the dial backwards, to say, all right, well, we're going to make sure that we're not at 415 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, that we are below 350, as is the goal, and that may, in fact, do some things to cool the planet back down and undo some of the damage that we have done with climate, with our climate change emissions. I don't know the answer to this, but I think it's an extraordinarily provocative question, and one that I think real scientific minds need to bring their intellect to bear. And we have to figure out if, in fact, we are adding all the CO2 to the atmosphere. What happens if we start to take it out again? And what are the safe ways of doing that? What are the safe ways of building into our economies and into our approach to the planet a balance? So this is really a challenging and interesting topic. I do grill my subject, Rick Parnell, my interview subject today, a little bit because I do want to make sure that this isn't something that we're going into blindly with some sort of Pollyannish view. Oh, well, we could just take the carbon backs out. So tune in. I think this is going to be an instructive and interesting episode. Stay with us. Rick Parnell of the Foundation for Climate Restoration. It's a great pleasure and honor to have Rick Parnell, who is the CEO of the Climate Restoration Foundation. Am I getting that correct?
Right. The Foundation for Climate Restoration.
Foundation for Climate Restoration. This is the outlandish idea that we can repair the damage done, which is not something people are talking about. People are talking about stopping the destruction as it flows and stopping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, but not a lot of people talking about restoration. So this is fascinating, and I really want to know how this works as it pertains to the Green New Deal. So first of all, just give us a basic introduction to some of these concepts, if you will, Rick.
Sure. Yeah. So I was in I call it the climate wars for almost 20 years. I was at the United Nations Foundation, and I just say climate wars because we were always debating and pushing on, is it going to be 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees? How bad can it get? We've got to make sure it's not as bad as it could be. Wait, what if we could actually get to a place where we could restore the climate to pre-industrial? Now, I've had people that will say to me, "Oh, but you can't bring back the species that are extinct." Well, no question about that. But the idea of restoring the climate to pre-industrial, simply put, means trying to return our carbon to less than 300 parts per million. Humanity has survived and thrived for thousands of years at 270, 300, and at 415 and racing upwards. Why wouldn't we go for the full restoration?
How?
So
I mean, that's
big piece of it.
I don't think anybody's going to challenge you on whether or not we should do that, because I think obviously, well, maybe some people would. Some people who work for, Russian and American oil companies might. But tell us why.
Yeah,
or how? Tell us, how do we start?
Well,
that
let me
sounds
answer
amazing.
the question of can we? Because when I started, I was approached. I retired from the UN Foundation. I was approached by the founder of the foundation. It was very, very early days, just getting up and getting started. And when he said, "Let's restore the climate," I said, "Wait! I've been in this a long time. You can't restore the climate. It's actually you can." So how do you restore it? You do it by carbon removal. That's the most simple part of the equation. But carbon removal through things like building materials. So you've probably heard there's 5, 6, 7 different companies globally that have come online in the last couple of years that are literally taking carbon, turning it into synthetic limestone to make cement, make concrete. So that's one solution.
I haven't heard of that.
You haven't heard of that?
I have not heard of that. Tell me more about that.
Sure. So
taking synthetic carbon.
Yeah, there's a process.
Okay.
There's 5 or 6 different companies that have slightly different processes, but what it does is it takes carbon. Some take it straight out of power stacks. They're developing direct air capture. That's to be scaled over time. But you take the carbon and you turn it into synthetic limestone. It's a chemical process that then you put into the concrete, and you put it into buildings. The difference in cost is somewhere between 1% and 2% from traditional concrete. Now imagine.
So it's like a teensy bit more expensive.
Teensy, and it won't be. 2 or 3 years from now, it'll be the same.
Right.
So the idea there, the fact there is that you replace the limestone, and then you're going to build buildings anyway. It's already a $1 trillion industry annually. It doubles in growth over every 10, 15 years. So this is not something you've got to wait for government funding on, subsidies. The technology is already there. It just has to be scaled, so more people know about it. That's our job, is making sure more people know that there's solutions there. Little known fact, 2%, if you restored 2% of the world's oceans with something like kelp, if you had kelp farms in 2% of the world's oceans, you would remove all of the legacy carbon that's in the atmosphere. One thing I want to make sure I say, Josh, before
what happens if you do kelp and it changes the biosphere and it changes the ecodynamics and all that kind of stuff? Like, isn't that dangerous to start sort of tinkering?
Yeah, first, let me just say, every single solution either has been tested or has to be tested. No question. So first and foremost, the bad name of geoengineering. We have been geoengineering the planet for more than 250 years. That's how we got to where we are today. So let's look at geoengineering solutions that we test. Our good partner, Sir David King at Cambridge University, he's setting up testing centers around the world to look at these kinds of solutions. So yes, absolutely, we have to test them. There are already kelp farms. Kelp grows 2 feet a day. There's already kelp farms I have to agree with you. I'm not one of those people who thinks nature is best left alone, right? We have invasive species marauding the countryside right now that have to be cultivated and gardened. And there is a mythology that suggests that, there was the state of nature at one point in time, and human beings were hunter-gatherers, and a lot of that science is sort of falling apart right now. And people are saying, no, actually, the indigenous people who lived on this continent were farmers, and they very much managed the environment and very much managed everything that was on the planet. And so why would you not do that if you were going to do it wisely? I think the question is always like, well, are you going to do it in a way that's not so wise, right? Because we do every once in a while introduce, species that then become harmful to everything else. That does happen. Unintended consequences. Yeah, no, I agree. But that's again, look at the leaps and bounds of science over the last 30 years. And so if you put these kind of guardrails around it, we should be doing this kind of testing. We should be looking at different kinds of solutions. But I think it's important, Josh. One thing I want to make sure that I
Well,
say.
you just I interrupted you and you sort of glazed over the kelp, but I want to know more about the kelp. Tell me more about the kelp. First, I have to say you're tuned in to Staying Home, your revolutionary guide to the Green New Deal. I'm Josh Fox. We'll be right back. You're tuned in to Staying Home, your revolutionary guide to the Green New Deal. I'm Josh Fox. My guest is Rick Parnell. Rick, we're talking about restoring the climate. We're talking about kelp. Let's talk about kelp. Tell me more about it.
Well,
and this sounds like the most scintillating late night interview ever. Kelp. We're going to talk about kelp. No, seriously.
Not a kelp
I will,
farmer.
if it'll save the planet, I'll talk about kelp. I will. That's what's going to happen today.
Okay, I can tell you this much about kelp. It grows 2 feet a day.
2 feet a day?
2 feet a day. But when a tree dies and it falls down in the woods, let's just say out of all complete natural, it dies and it falls down in the wood, it decays and it releases carbon in the atmosphere. Kelp dies and other ocean plants die, they go to the bottom and they sequester the carbon. So that's another piece of it. Kelp is also a food material for humans. It's a food material for feedstock. And
you can eat kelp?
I don't eat kelp every day, but I have had kelp.
What's your recommended daily allowance of kelp?
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, go ahead.
And I have to say, this is the world of COVID. My dog is going nuts right now, but
your dog is crying out for more kelp Alpo.
But let me say, one thing that I did want to stress earlier is that the thing that really, really got me so engaged in climate restoration is that mitigation, adaptation, critically important. Have to do it, going to do it. We're going to get to net zero. We have to.
Yep.
But what people don't understand is that when we get there, 95% of the 2 centuries of carbon still there. So we still have the temperatures, we still have the storms, we still have the fires because we've got all this legacy carbon to get out.
It's still up there.
But we can do it. We can do it through these natural and technical.
But how do you get it from up there into the concrete, or does it just happen?
It just happens. It's just part of there's 2
It's part
layers.
of the natural cycle.
Yeah, there's 2 layers of carbon, some that is in the upper atmosphere, and over time it eventually gets out into space. But the carbon that's in the lower atmosphere, you can get it out.
So we're actually contributing carbon dioxide into space?
Yeah, but again...
Are people worried about space warming? I just wanted asking for a friend. No, I'm sorry, I'm kidding. Let's keep going, though, because this is actually... It's so amazing. You think you know the terrain. You think you know what you're talking about when you're talking about climate change. You think you're talking about solar panels and wind turbines and all of the things that are a part of the Green New Deal, especially one of them is justice, right? But we don't talk about restoring the habitat, restoring the earth. So let's keep going.
Yeah.
More. So kelp in a small area would take that much carbon out of the atmosphere. How much of the area?
2% of the oceans. If you restored the health of 2% of the oceans with things like kelp, then you could sequester all the excess carbon. Now, we're not going to do that.
2% has got to be a lot, though, right?
It's a lot, right? So we're not going to do 2% of the oceans, and we're not going to do 100% of the concrete industry. We're going to do a little bit of the concrete industry. We're going to do some of the kelp in the oceans. We're all going to buy the shoes that have carbon negative soles, which are very popular now.
Wait a minute, carbon negative soles? That sounds also like that's like a 90s band, right?
Well,
I was really into them, carbon negative soles. I love their hit. I'm sustainable, aren't you? No, wait, listen. What does that mean, though? What is the carbon? Wait, hold on. Just stop. What is a carbon negative sole?
Allbirds shoes has a process.
And can I be saved?
They remove the carbon and they put it in the sole of the shoe. There's a carbon negative in Brooklyn. There's a carbon negative vodka that's being made right now. There's carbon negative jewelry. I mean, there are solutions for how to.
So the hipster vodka is going to save the world.
Oh, absolutely! Don't you think? Don't you?
I'm down.
Oh,
I'm ready. I am so ready. Wait. So what does that mean? Carbon negative vodka. How does that work?
I don't know. I just know that it's out there.
It just means that, like, when they make the vodka, it uses more carbon.
No, there's a process it's a process for getting the carbon out as they make it. I'm just giving you examples.
This
Again,
sounds like one of those 70s infomercial where it's like, don't smoke pot, it kills your brain cells. Don't drink Brooklyn vodka, you will become a carbon negative soul.
There you go. But no, but those kinds of
I want that on a t-shirt.
Think about this. I've only given you 2 or 3 big markets and then some small ones, but there's 650 companies right now that are out there that are in the carbon removal solutions business. Some small, some big, some are climate, carbon engineering, some are Climeworks. But just imagine, I've had colleagues say to me, climate restoration is where wind and solar was 15 years ago, where everybody said, "Oh, it'll never be competitive with the price of oil." Yeah, look at where we are.
Oh no, I know. But I guess what my question is can this help heal frontline communities? Can this help heal? Because I've looked into this quite a bit, because like oil spills are some of the most devastating events, and they're incredibly difficult to clean up, because what you're usually doing is you're taking one group of toxic chemicals and putting it on top of another group of toxic chemicals, right? Like they did in the Gulf of Mexico with the dispersants that were toxic like crazy, and they spread that onto the oil and they increased the toxic level. Or up in Alaska where they're using soap. Like, you don't want soap in your ecosystem. Soap is a surfactant. Soap can kill microorganisms. Soap is, So what is about the restorative aspects of this? We looked at biomimicry and mushrooms and all these things that could actually suck up the oil but not do the damage. Is some of the research there as well?
Yeah, I mean, beginnings of, and again, this is where one of the big things that we need is funding for research. We need the IPCC to call on, we need governments to call on the IPCC to do a full report on what it would mean to restore the climate. What are the different solutions? What are the different testing that needs to be done? What are the policies that need to change?
But your foundation is doing some of that work, right? So
we're doing a lot of that.
What would the recommendations, what would they be?
Yeah, so I would love to see one of our colleagues at Breakthrough Energy. We were talking about this the other day. I'd love to see, we spend so much money on health. Again, we have been doing bioengineering for decades. We have the NIH has a $47 billion annual budget, but we don't put anywhere near that into energy research or climate research in the U.S. Imagine if we took that kind of research seriously. That's a small piece of it, but one of our partners at Guggenheim Investments, as he has said to me, why would anybody invest? They got out of the oil and gas industry 5 years ago, not because they're the first to say, not because they'd like to say for the better, of man, but because it's a terrible investment. So I think you're starting to see.
It's also a terrible industry. So what about this though? What about the truth that if you all of a sudden make it totally fine to just dump huge amounts of carbon into the atmosphere, that the oil and gas industry are going to be like, yay, let's continue to do it, when there's so many other things wrong with the business model of fracking and burning and combustion and all that pollution and everything else, right? Because it's a global health catastrophe. It kills 5 to 7 million people a year. Could this be used, this idea, as sort of carte blanche for the oil industry to just keep polluting?
No, we're not going to let that happen. That's not going to happen, because I think that especially the youth are not going to stand for that. I mean, we're already transitioning to renewables. That's going to happen. Extraction is going to die. It's just going to take time. And the more that we can grow the industries that can allow us to move more rapidly, that to me is the solution.
Right. But I mean, but wouldn't you think that some of the oil industry would sort of like be sponsoring this kind of thing?
There's always going to be a bad apple in the bunch, no question. And so we just
a lot of apples. If you're talking about Exxon, Shell, and Chevron, I mean, to be honest, that's a few orchards. That's a whole, it's a lot.
I'll give you that. But I will say that, when I was working in climate 15, 20 years ago, the idea that anybody could even think that you could see the beginning of the end of the oil companies, everyone was in that camp of like, well, that's never going to happen. So let's think about an alternative plan. Now it's going to happen. Now you can see it. You can see it on the horizon.
I've heard something about this Million Oyster Project, where they're using oysters along the bay in New York City. And those oysters are creating, you can't eat them because the water is so incredibly polluted. But the Million Oyster Project is it's a restoration project that will help, I don't know, I guess make Brooklyn and New York's coastline less susceptible to storm surge. Is that in the same arena as this thinking?
That's not one of the solutions that we have taken a whole lot of look at. But yes, I've read about it. But there's all kinds of these different solutions out there.
Well, tell us more about some other ones. We've talked about kelp. We've talked about limestone and concrete. What are some of the other things?
So as I said, there's probably 650. There are solutions that do everything from
650 different kinds of ways to do this.
Yes, different companies that are working on ways to do this. Not 650 different solutions. 650 different companies that are working on various solutions. I have been approached by everything from how to remove methane from the cow, 80% from the cow, to the milk cow with a natural solution. I have seen, I can't tell you the number.
So just to explain to people, cows belch when they eat industrial feed. they belch an enormous amount of methane. That methane is very toxic and very bad for the atmosphere. It's 100 times more potent than carbon dioxide is as a warming agent. So stopping cows from belching as much, of course, grass-fed beef doesn't belch nearly as much.
Right. Right.
So some of it's the industrial feed, but you're saying that there are companies trying to come up with like antacid for cows, Bessie's Tums.
Something like that, yes. But let me come back to, because you asked a question that I want to make sure I get back to. What is the job of the foundation? The job of the foundation is to tie all of these together. So we just had our forum, our second annual forum, and we brought together national governments. And so during our forum, Kenya has put a resolution forward at the UN on climate restoration and carbon removal. We brought together in the investment community, we brought together the solutions, some of which we've talked about. We brought together local governments. So last year, the first local government, Santa Clara County, Silicon Valley, naturally, was the first government in the world to call for climate restoration, which means their planning, their procurement, their municipal buildings can now move towards climate restoration permanence. So, and now we're talking to cities around the world about joining that. So our job.
So at that point, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off there.
No,
but at that point, when it starts to actually engage, do the glaciers start to freeze again? Hold on, let me say. You're tuned in to Staying Home, your revolutionary guide to the Green New Deal. We'll be right back. You're tuned in to Staying Home, your revolutionary guide to the Green New Deal. I'm Josh Fox. We're talking about climate restoration with Rick Parnell, who is the leader of the Foundation for Climate Restoration. Rick, so if you start getting this stuff going, like really going, right? Like you get all these 600 companies and it's starting to have an impact and you're planting the kelp and the limestone cement and everything, and you bring the carbon back down, does that start to refreeze the Arctic? Does that start to retropic areas that are, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, no.
What effect does that have on ecosystem that we are all dependent on, that we're worried about collapsing?
Okay. Again, Josh, I'm not the scientist, so don't quote me necessarily on the science. But if you get back down to 300 parts per million and you lower the global warming numbers, then some of these things start to happen. What we'd love to see, I'd love to see NASA take on a modeling project that would say, what would it look like in 2050, 2040, 2030, if we start to implement some of these different solutions? How many, now we have record number of storms. Would the number of storms go down? We need to model that. Nobody's modeling it right now. What would it look like for these kinds of solutions?
Right. What's the difference between this and people who, I often think that the real difference between rural Americans and urban Americans are how much they talk about chemtrails. Like if you go out in rural America, and if you're in rural America, you know what I'm talking about. You go out, you see the trail across the sky, so it's like, yup, it's chemtrails, it's it's nitrous oxide, it's aluminum dioxide, it's tinfoil helmets raining from the sky. And they love to talk about this. Mm-hmm. And no one in urban America talks about this because who looks up? What's the difference between talking about that kind of geoengineering, right, the evil kind, and what you're talking about now?
Yeah, I mean, if you take, so let's just talk about airplanes. Carbon engineering is producing carbon recycling. It's not restoration, but it's recycling for fuels. So taking carbon out of the atmosphere, turning it into jet fuel. If you think about it in terms of that, again, it's part of the blended mix that we're going to have to do. So as you see the jets fly over and you see the trails, you're going to see those hopefully over time, because I think the airline industry, it's going to be a while before we see solar.
What I'm talking about is something that's been debunked, right? Chemtrails are not real.
Oh,
chemtrails
yeah,
real?
Yeah. No. Sorry, I was getting a little bit more technical. Yeah, no, it's been debunked. But I mean, there's also some of these, our own philosophy at the foundation is that there are some people's minds that you just can't change. There's some people that are in that. Okay. They want to believe the conspiracy theory, and you just have to move on from that.
Right, but I guess what I'm trying to say, though, is the reason why people are upset about chemtrails is because they think that people are geoengineering the planet, and that gets them uncomfortable. So what essentially is like the difference between doing that? Because like it sounds to me like you're sending into a lot of different processes into motion, and when you have multiple experiments happening on multiple levels in multiple ways, that's when I start getting nervous. You know what I mean? Like when all of a sudden you have 5 different controls, like you have cement, and then you have kelp, and then you have other kinds of things about taking carbon after, with like carbon sequestration and so forth. You know what I mean? That sounds like a rather massive global experiment.
Again,
not that we're not doing that now.
Not that we're not doing it, but again, with guardrails, with testing, we're not talking about just going off willy-nilly and doing things. But what I would say to you and to your audience, what's the alternative? For us to get to 2050 and beyond, and to have said to our children and grandchildren, sorry, we forgot to remove the legacy carbon that we put up there for 2 centuries. Right. We got close, but we didn't quite finish the job. That's just not the human way.
Right. That it is looking at the earth as a cultivatable landscape on a much grander scale. Is that right?
Yeah, I haven't quite heard of it put that way, but I think that humanity, when you put solutions in front of them, I'm a firm believer that I think we've done a really great job of waking people up to the broader community, you included, to waking people up to the problem of climate change. Okay, great. Again, there's a little sliver, I would say, that's somewhere, that they're never going to believe, and that's fine. We can't waste our energy on that. But we've woken people up. Now we have people, I think, so awake that they're a little bit paralyzed. So now let's look at, okay, there are solutions. You can demand.
That's true.
You can demand your local government look at climate restoration solutions. You can use your vote. You can, as we like to say, whether you're in the pews, if you're at school, you're at work, wherever you are, local government, doesn't matter. You should be asking for climate restoration.
What has been the reaction from some of the more mainstream climate people, movements or whatever? Have you talked to Bill McKibben? Have you talked to 350? Have you talked to Greenpeace? What is the reaction of this? Because they are so hyper-focused, and I would say also so obsessed with and enraged at and angry at the oil companies, right? Mm-hmm. That has, and as am I, right? That is almost like a hard thing to let go of.
Yeah.
When you're talking about like this as a completely other angle, right? What has been the reception to these ideas
it's been,
amongst that community?
It's been a little bit mixed, as you would expect. We've had reactions from part of the climate community of we have a plan. Let's stay with the plan. It's mitigation adaptation. We're going to fight for 1.5 degrees. Right. Then we've had others that we'll have a conversation, and maybe this has been sort of the classic. You have a conversation with someone, whether it's a scientist, it's someone in the UN leadership system or whatever, and you have a conversation, and roughly 25 minutes in, they're like, wait, so you want people to focus on this third leg, not instead of, third leg of the stool, climate restoration, in order to get the legacy carbon out? Yeah. Oh, well, I'm all for that. I totally support that. Right. Once they get it, this is not an either or. This is a must do. It's an and.
Okay, I see. Because you're worried that even if we turn it all around right now and implement the Green New Deal, that carbon is still up there. What is that carbon? What does it do if you don't get rid of it?
It stays, 95% of the carbon will still be there, and it will still keep the global warming. It'll still keep the heat shield, and we will still have the temperatures that we have. We will still have the ice melting. We'll still have the storms. We're not going to have it go back down. Right. Until we get the carbon out, as well as we can't. It's like the one of the videos that we have, really simple and people love it. Bathtub. The earth is sitting in a bathtub half full of water. It's been bathing just fine for thousands of years. Here comes humanity over 2 centuries, turns on the faucet, the tub is overflowing. Okay, mitigation adaptation. We figure out how to live in the bathtub, we turn the faucet off, but it's still full of water. So all we're saying is we need to pull the plug and just bring the water down.
Right. I see.
That's simple.
But so what about people who say, well, it will do that naturally if you stop flooding new carbon into the atmosphere? What about people?
Years.
Some of it will. In how many years?
1,000 years. Hundreds of years, pushing 1,000 years.
So this is so fascinating to me because, like, I'm grilling you because I've obviously, like, the idea of tinkering en masse with the global climate is something I generally reserve to the extremists who work for oil companies, right? Those are generally the evil scientists who are like, let's add huge amounts let's change the geocomposition of the atmosphere. That's a great idea. And very few other
that would not be me. Sorry, no.
Well, but you, in a way, though, yes, because we're saying we're going to. So why is it different?
It's different because it's the missing piece. I think it is more damage to say let's do nothing than it is to let's test and try and again put policies and guardrails around these different solutions, test them out, see what works, see what doesn't work. Very small scale, and then what should be scaled from there. I mean,
So what's the process from here on out to getting these things tested and starting to be implemented in your view?
Yeah. So what we are doing at the Foundation for Climate Restoration is that we're trying to get everyone to march together for COP26. So we're calling it the Road to Glasgow. So working across all these different fields that I've talked about, from local government, national governments, the UN system, investors, youth, faith, all the different organizations working together over the next year. So by the time we get to COP26, there is a full discussion, and coming out of COP26 next November in Glasgow, there are policies, there the IPCC, everyone's engaged around, okay, this is the third pillar of climate action. What are we going to do? What are the policies? What are the testing? What is the research dollars? What are the things that we need to do over the next several years to ensure that we get this last third piece of the work done?
And are there, what's the road to getting to that? You know, I mean, are there engagement processes happening right now with the current environmental movement, with the NGOs, with the big greens? How's that going?
All of the above. As I said, we just had our forum, our second annual forum during UN General Assembly Week and during Climate Week NYC. Very well attended. We had 850 people join us. We had 44 or 5 different speakers. And over the next year, we are working with TED Countdown. We're working with TED itself. We're working with the Vatican. We're working with other faith leaders. We're working with
the Vatican,
the World Economic Forum. We're working all these different across sectors. You're going to see, all kinds of convenings over the next several months. But what our job at the Foundation for Climate Restoration, our job is to go to where they are. So if that means going to the World Economic Forum, where all that stuff happens, if it means going to convenings at Skull Forum and others, that's the path for us.
It feels very much like an interesting way of thinking about utopia, right? A managed system that is the Earth, a managed system where we encourage biodiversity, where we keep the carbon at a certain level, where we try to make sure that we're behaving on the Earth as we would maybe in a house or in your own, in your living room. You turn the heat up, you turn the heat back down. you make sure that the vent from the stove doesn't, flood into your bedroom. That this is a way of looking at operating on the planet that is actually kind of familiar to us. But does this preclude a degree of human control that we've never even thought of before? Before you answer the question, I have to say you're tuned in to Staying Home, your revolutionary guide to the Green New Deal. My guest is Rick Parnell. We'll be right back. You're tuned in to Staying Home, your revolutionary guide to the Green New Deal. My guest is Rick Parnell. Does this preclude a level of human control over the planet that we have thus far not had? You know what I'm saying?
I don't know that it's a level of control. I think it's a level of responsibility. I think that, if COVID has taught us anything, it's that we are one interconnected humanity. And so we have to work together on this. I think that collectively we can work to have some of these solutions get us to a place where we can restore the climate.
How much do these things cost? Are they very expensive? Do we have any ballpark on any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, the ballparks range from over the next couple of decades from $50 billion annually to $1 trillion, but they're not costs. They're
wait. $50 billion annually is extremely cheap.
Yeah,
you're talking about what is the scale of that?
For one of the solutions, kelp can cost upwards of $50 billion a year for that solution. As I said, the concrete industry is $1 trillion industry, but we're not talking about adding $1 trillion of cost on. We're talking about change the way that concrete is used. Use a different kind of concrete, and you're not saying put $1 trillion on top of. You're just saying it's a different way to work at it. Let me give you an example. San Francisco Airport. It's already been tested. They've already had a third-party review of architects. One of the wings at Southwest Airlines used this carbon negative concrete. So if you've been to SFO and you've flown on Southwest, you're walking on this concrete. So it's already here. It's just about.
I can't believe you would think I would go to San Francisco. That's ridiculous. No, but first of all, listen, I just have to say thank you so much. This is a fascinating subject. And what you're saying, though, what I'm hearing when I think about the Green New Deal is $17 trillion. That's cheap, what you're saying. Cheaper.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But let me ask you this, and this is me just being, not just being devil's advocate, but being a very important advocate for justice, for the idea of justice, because the idea of the Green New Deal, which we talk about on this show every day, is not about solar panels and technology and renewable energy and, wind and all that. Fundamental to the concept of the Green New Deal is this idea of justice. Frontline justice, racial justice, justice for communities, justice for Native Americans, justice for ways of life. And that is so built into this. Does this technological fix have
natural?
Well, technological and natural, fine. But does this material approach have a philosophy, a value system that is in a similar way to what the Green New Deal has in terms of what's focused on justice and focused on equality?
At the end of the day, it's all about justice, because you're talking about people living, the poorest of the people will end up with the ones that will have the greatest burden. People that are, look at Bangladesh, it will be underwater. Look at people that are living on the coastlines, they'll be underwater if we don't do these kinds of solutions. So absolutely, this is about justice for all of humanity.
Wow. All right. Well, listen, I think that this is an extraordinarily fascinating conversation. I want to thank you so much for being with us today. Rick Parnell, good luck. How do people interact with what you're doing now?
Go to f4cr.org, Foundation for Climate Restoration.org, and take the pledge. If you take the pledge and sign up, then we will keep you updated on all the information, all the different convenings, the solutions as they come online, and on all the headlines. Absolutely. So please, f4cr.org.
All right. Thank you so much, Rick Parnell. It's been an extraordinary conversation. I'm sorry if I seem like a little skeptical or I'm pushing you. It's just because I feel like it's important to put these ideas through some sort of rigor, at least on this program. But thank you so much. And I really, really will continue to look at this because it's a fascinating thing that people are not talking about enough.
Stay tuned.
All right. Thanks, Rick.
All right. Take care.
Take care. You're tuned in to Staying Home, your revolutionary guide to the Green New Deal. We'll be right back. And with that, let's move on to the joy of life and celebration that always is, Mr. Don Vappy.
I'll just get on with it.
I'm going to wear my sunglasses because I feel like it's cooler.
That's yeah.
When you play the song,
it's going to help me too, man. Here we go.
All right.
Sometimes it's hard for you to see that you're not different from me. Wake up, brothers and sisters, take my hand. Gotta vote big, everybody. Gotta vote early, everybody. Get it done fast, cause this can't last much longer. It's the truth, man. We gotta wake up, see the light. Just can't afford to fight amongst each other over every little thing. Look at the big picture, we'll get there. Just gotta vote big, everybody. Gotta vote early, everybody. Get it done fast, cause this can't last much longer. No, baby, gotta get it done. I know we can get there if all of us just care enough to stay involved, keep their feet to the fire, protest, call them, write them, and we gotta vote big, everybody. Gotta vote early, everybody. Get it done fast, cause this can't last much longer. No, baby, it ain't gonna last. we can say is, hey, freedom and equality is finally here. But it won't happen until we vote big. Everybody, we gotta vote early. Everybody, get it done fast, 'cause this can't last much longer. Get it done, 'cause this can't last much longer. Get it done fast, 'cause this can't last much longer. We'll have time to work out those little things. Get it done.
Wow, 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 wow. Another instant classic. I love it. I love it. Man, I love this because you're coming. I know this is going to be a whole record. This is going to be Don Vappy's agitprop political songs. We're going to make like a whole agitprop.
I try to wait till as long as I can because I want to make sure it's current.
You're just coming up with them one after another. You must be inspired.
I am, man. I'm inspired to vote. I've been trying to talk to everybody to vote early. I mean, just as you said earlier, man. I mean, do you have any doubt now? I mean, there's no doubt. You can't hide behind, well, I'm not a racist, his policies. No, you cannot hide behind that.
No, you can't.
He said it.
Yeah.
He said it on TV, and he did not denounce him. And what we've always known, he's got to go, man. He's got to go.
Yeah. Well, I love the song. I love all three of these songs. They're like a song suite. And I think I want to say, there's deeper undercurrents to this moment. I feel like there are political threads that you could weave into tunes that have to do with the history of where we're at right now. Or maybe that feeling, the feelings of, because I think what's happening to Americans right now, apart from that tiny minority, that small 30% of those people who are white, ignorant, authoritarian Republicans, apart from those few people, everybody else is suffering. And we've been suffering for a long time. There's a suffering in the air. That's a good title for a song. There's a suffering in the air that is happening because we feel this sense of injustice all the time, because most people in America don't want this guy. And it's been the corrupt system that has put these people in power and in place.
Yes, sir. Well, just trying to make the light shine more than just, we all know about the darkness.
That's what we're doing here. Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week.
Yes, sir.
For the next song of the week. You can use any of my suggestions, but I know you're always going to come up with something brilliant. All right, Don Vappy, thank you very much. This is Staying Home, your revolutionary guide. Listen, everybody, vote, and vote with precision. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow.
They had things, levels of voting that if you ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again.
We don't run our own country. We've lost our democracy, and all we have left is rage.
Where are the Democrats? I would be on every cable news channel screaming and yelling and talking about what the Republicans are doing right now.
How do you expect us to get excited to show up to the polls for these loser Democrats? How come we have nothing but cowards who'll never fight? Primaries are everything.
Building a great wall on the southern border.
You have politicians who fearmonger about disenfranchised groups.
The first attacker came through the visa lottery.
Now they are against legal immigrants.
Ending chain migration.
They don't want people from those countries coming here because they're fucking racist. This guy's an absolute monumental disgrace to all of us as Americans.
Stop treating us like animals and bugs and start treating us with some respect.
That is what I was warning about for literally years on this program. This is what they promised they would do if they got into power, and what do you know? They did it.
I've now shown dozens of videos on the Young Turks of cops handcuffing people who are bleeding to death. His life means nothing We have been trained to be cowards, so we're gonna handcuff that guy bleeding to death.
When it comes to these protesters who are justifiably enraged at members of their community getting gunned down and murdered by police force.
We are a physical representation of our support for George Floyd.
They said that this was impossible, but now we're beginning to move that boulder. And at the end, we'll get our democracy back. Primary the living hell out of these Democrats, and let's take over the party. That's a ghost ship. Let's board it, and let's take it.
I've been a fan of TYT, I believe, for the last 6 years.
5 years.
3 years now. 7 years.
4 years now.
2.5 years. I just started because she got me into it.
My boyfriend actually watches it every morning and every night, so I kind of just started watching it with him, and I love it. I mean, it's the only way that I find my news.
Looking through YouTube, looking for political shows that look cool.
I came across a very angry rant from Cenk, and that's when I knew.
So I was immediately in love with the show.
And then I haven't missed a live show since then.
10 times a day, I watched the show in the morning.
Whenever I had a bad day at high school, Young Turks.
Man, Cenk is just so blunt and honest, and I love the honesty, and there's no BS behind the news, and they just tell everything like it is.
There's nobody censoring them. There's nobody there to say you can't do this, you can't say that.
That feel of authenticity makes it seem like what they're saying is true.
I feel like I get the real story from the Young Turks.
I am TYT.
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 Breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. This is Brett Ehrlich with Breaking News with Brett Ehrlich. Bernie Sanders wants to break Wall Street, and he wants to break it real bad.
This election is the most amazing of my lifetime. That's why I can't wait to talk to you guys about it. Not just on air, but because of Aspiration, I'm gonna have a private conversation with 4 of you if you have an Aspiration account after the election. We're gonna talk about what happened, but also what a progressive's gonna go do afterwards. And that's really important. So if you already have an Aspiration account, don't worry about it. You're saving money, you're saving the planet, perfect. But it's definitely not too late. You could sign up right now, aspiration.com/TYT. Sign up before the election and we'll have the conversation afterwards.
Welcome to the conversation. I'm Anna Kasparian, and I'm delighted to have a wonderful guest on today who has been planning and organizing for something that many people across the country have been worried about, possible attempts by the Trump administration to essentially orchestrate a coup in the United States following the general election. Joshua Kahn Russell is someone you may have heard of because of his organizing. He's the executive director of the Wildfire Project, and he's a social movement facilitator and has trained thousands of people across the globe. Joshua, thank you for joining us.
So grateful to be here, Anna.
So you have decided to begin organizing, which I'm beyond grateful for, in the event that Trump orchestrates a coup. And so I think it makes sense to start off this conversation by discussing what you mean by a coup.
Sure. So we think of a coup as if the government, number one, stops counting all the votes. Number two, declares a winner who didn't get the most votes. Or number three, allows someone to stay in power who didn't win the election. Which seems simple, but it's already happened here. It happened in 2000 when they were able to punt it to the Supreme Court. And so part of what I'm part of a network of nonviolent direct action trainers and social movement strategists who come out of a variety of movements from, OGs in the civil rights struggle, including there's people in our group who are the coordinators of Mississippi Freedom Summer in 1964, to the labor movement, to the climate movement. And in August, when Trump started saying that he wasn't going to leave office, we started to see the writing on the wall and began a project called Choose Democracy to prepare people to understand that yes, it can happen here. And also there's a strategy that we can build around it.
Yeah, so I love that you're encouraging people to take action and you're organizing people to do it because, since you referenced 2000, that election was stolen, and it was naive to kind of sit back and think that the Democratic Party would do something about it. And so this is really a people-powered effort to mitigate any type or stop any attempt by Trump to essentially steal the election or refuse to leave office. And so walk me through what the strategy is.
Sure. So it starts from a framework of what we call non-compliance. Actually, let me take a step back and let you know what we've been doing so far, which is that up until the election, the approach has been what's called civil engagement, which a lot of groups are doing. So that's voting, getting out the vote, including there's a lot of groups around the country who are doing de-escalation trainings to go to the polls to, in case there are militia people or Proud Boys trying to intimidate people from voting, things like that, right? And so we're quickly coming into the next phase that's not just around engagement. And all of these hundreds of organizations, thousands of organizations actually who are doing that are starting to pivot to anticipate where we might need an election arc. And the strategy of non-compliance, first of all, in our trainings, we do a lot of historical case studies. We talk about coups all around the world. The reason why we use the language of a coup is not to invoke, we're not trying to be hyperbolic. We're not trying to imagine that there's tanks gonna be rolling in the streets or anything like that. Instead, we're trying to have precision, that there's a dynamic at play, which is that there is essentially a contest for legitimacy. And we can learn from coups in the past, whether that is Thailand in 1992, Argentina in 1987, Germany in 1920. There's a lot of other case studies we go through. And the basic way that we view power, there's a theory of power behind the strategy, which is that we don't see power as sort of resting independently in the hands of politicians or business leaders. Instead, a government is like let's say it's like a roof, right? And the roof is held up by several pillars of society. That power actually is held from below. It's people need to consent to and participate in society in order for the society to function. So those pillars that hold up the roof of a government or of a regime are the media, it's capital, it's labor, it's the military, it's the police, it's politicians, it's consumers, right? And so following from that, some of those pillars, regular people can have some influence over, and some of those pillars we don't have any impact on. So the strategy is we target the pillars that we have some influence over and we remove their consent from the governing administration. And if you pull out enough pillars or weaken enough pillars, the roof just falls down, right? It needs the support of those things. So what it is about is withdrawing our consent in the same way. It's like the logic of a strike. So in the same way that workers remove their labor from the system so the system cannot function, that's where they find their power. The same thing works in many other areas of society. So that's the basis of the strategy. I can talk a little bit more about what it looks like moving forward, but I'll pause there.
So, the heart of the strategy, if it escalates to the point where it's clear that there's a coup happening, the heart of the strategy is a general strike, essentially refusing to work, ensuring that nothing is functioning until democracy is restored. And I think I love that you're pointing to all these historical references of how coups were successfully, prevented, because you can do something. If you're an average American, you shouldn't feel powerless. You shouldn't just assume that the system is the way it is. I mean, part of my worry, Joshua, is with the 3 Supreme Court justices who were successfully appointed by Donald Trump, the outcome of the election, even if it's absolutely fraudulent, illegitimate, it's clearly a coup, it'll have this veil of legitimacy. And so I'm really curious, how we can effectively respond to that. Because there will be efforts to delegitimize the people who are organizing right now, the people who are gonna take action until our democracy is restored. And so how do we fight back against those narratives?
Yeah, I love how you frame that, Anna, because the thing that the coup plotters always want is for us to believe that we don't have agency. They want us to sit back and bite our nails, looking at the courts, thinking that they will resolve it. And the reality is that no matter the chaos that could ensue, and to be clear, we're not saying a coup is definitely going to happen. What we're saying is the likelihood is clear enough that we need to start preparing and to start helping people understand the dynamics of what's at play. And when you're in a contest for legitimacy, so I spent my whole life as an activist, and I, for example, have been loath at the idea that the Democrats are constantly tacking towards and trying to appeal towards like some mythologized center instead of focusing on building their progressive base. This is a moment actually where I need to step out of that mindset, where we actually are trying to push an uncertain center off the fence, because all of the tactics that fit into this strategy are about basically peeling off defectors, helping people refuse illegitimate orders, refuse orders to, whether that's toss out ballots, stop votes from being counted, regardless at what stage of government it is, to strengthen their backbones, right? And so, our belief is that if we move into typical activist mode and we just protest, if we just protest Trump, that's not gonna do anything. That's just going to further the existing narrative of polarization. Trump's base is going to be out protesting. The left is going to be out protesting. When coups are when coup resistance is successful, they don't vilify the leader that's trying to take power. They champion democracy. Like when Argentina defeated the last coup, they had coups from 1930 to 1987. When they finally defeated it, they were in the streets chanting "Viva Argentina." They were chanting "Long live democracy." And then when they defeated that coup through a series of non-compliance tactics, it actually built the foundation upon which they could start to organize for a deeper democracy, which is my hope, but I'm getting ahead of myself, I know. So this is what it actually looks like in practice. This is what I mean. So,
yeah, no, I love it. I love the strategy, and I love that you made that. You differentiated between protests, which of course protests are important. Neither one of us are trying to minimize that, but this is a tactical approach that essentially puts, capital in jeopardy and money talks. And so I think it's a smart strategy. But what comes along with that is, people have material needs, and I have no doubt that our democracy is important to everyone, and people are going to do what it takes to avoid Donald Trump essentially stealing this election if he attempts to do it. But my question is, how do we communicate to people who are worried about further decline of their material needs?
Yeah, let me describe the escalation arc, because at each step of the way, there's ways that we can take care of each other's needs.
I love that.
we're not imagining that we're jumping to a general strike. We're not even sure, the language of a general strike. We're talking about rolling strikes. We don't need to have every sector of society shutting down in order to pull this off. Capital is one of those pillars, but there's several kinds of pillars. So even if you're not a worker in a union, but I'll talk a little bit later about labor, you have a role to play. And that's really our message. We've been training thousands and thousands of people. We're doing trainings every other day. Each training has a couple thousand people. On our website, we're also plugging people into different actions. And so the first phase that we've been in has been about strengthening election officials' backbones. And so that's a really easy ask. That's things like, there's a group called Protect Our Election that's been doing letter writing campaigns to election officials. And normally, I'm not a big fan of petitions or letter writing campaigns, but what we're trying to do is create a groundswell of support so that if those officials get extra legal orders, right? Or if there is confusing chaos with conflicting narratives about the legitimacy of ballots, that they can stand on the right side of democracy and know that there's people supporting them. So that's kind of the phase that we've been in. Another phase is Choose Democracy, the organization that we've been building, has had a pledge. And the pledge is that, well, up until now, number one, we're gonna vote. Number two, that in addition to that, we will refuse to accept the election results if a winner is declared before counting all the votes. Number three, we will non-violently take to the streets if a coup is attempted. And number four, if it gets there, we will shut down the country if necessary. So there's an escalation arc built into it. And the pledge is not just an abstract, like we feel good because we're making a pledge, it's an organizing tool. And so we've had now over 35,000 people sign the pledge, and many of those people are using it as a tool to pressure politicians to sign it so that they can have something to hold them to account in the chaos that could ensue, right? And so that's one example of one of those pillars, is the legitimizing force of politicians and ways to push them off the fence, right? So then the next phase is on November 4th, there's gonna be rallies all over the country. 500 have been planned by a group called Protect the Results. And so in those rallies, it's gonna be about counting every vote, right? So it's again, building this groundswell of support. Then we enter into this non-compliance phase. And from that phase, we're going to be withdrawing our participation. So what that looks like isn't just sort of like, well, I'll talk about labor first and then I'll talk about the other things. We're really excited and encouraged by all of the different unions who've gotten involved. So the Rochester AFL-CIO, Central Labor Council, just declared that they're going to go on strike and call on all of the other affiliates in the AFL-CIO to do the same. Just their one local represents 70,000 workers. The Detroit Postal Workers have been printing up our pledge with official union letterhead. The National Union of Healthcare Workers has also made a similar kind of commitment. The Massachusetts, or the Western Mass area, what are they called? Labor Federation has also made a pledge to strike. The Seattle Educators Association has made a similar pledge, the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee. So this is really happening. But in addition, even if you're not a part of a union, in this phase, and to be clear, what that looks like is wildcat strikes. We're calling them rolling strikes rather than a general strike. And it's about shutting down key parts of society, and regular people have a role to play. So there's a lot, groups like Sunrise and groups like the Dream Defenders are coordinating national youth strikes, for example. We are also talking about consumer strikes. So that's basically like a generalized boycott, where if this escalates to the point where we need to shut down the country, that during the holiday season, if we refuse through withdrawing our purchasing power as just regular consumers, that puts capital in a position where they have to get off the fence, and they are making calculations based on their money as well, right? So there's a bunch of different points, or it could look like not just withdrawing our compliance, but using nonviolent direct action through things like rolling blockades, of shutting down corporations, right? Including shutting down media corporations if they're carrying media narratives that are anti-democratic, for example. And so at each stage, and I'll say one other piece, one other key pillar is government workers, right? And so for example, in 1920, when there was an attempted coup, they marched on the Capitol, they had all these institutions on their side. All of the government workers were like, we're out, we're done, we're not carrying out the orders of the coup plotters, and they had no one to type up their manifesto, the newspapers wouldn't print it. And so there's a group called Shutdown DC, which has the logistical capability through direct action to shut down Washington DC. They've been organizing groups called Feds for Democracy, another group called Democracy Kitchen, that are organizing long-term career federal workers to resist extra legal orders as well. And so part of our proposition is that if it escalates to this point, the tectonic shifts that can happen are so dramatic that when there's a template in place, it's easy for lots more groups to get on board. And we've seen even in the last week, hundreds of thousands of people moving in line with this strategy. And the great thing about it is you can participate in it, and we need everyone to participate in it, regardless of station in life. And that's one of the keys that we've learned. There's a couple keys from successful coup resistance. One is that it needs widespread participation. We're not mobilizing some like left margin that is self-righteous and whatever. We're getting everyone and your mom involved. And number two, it needs to have nonviolent discipline in order to create the conditions under which we can win that contest for legitimacy.
You know what the progressive movement needs? It needs a little energy, a little pizzazz, maybe a little caffeine. Oh, coffee. But what if it was Too Strong Coffee? Yes, new, toostrongcoffee.com/TYT. Look, this helps progressive causes. It's also organic and fair trade, so you've got peace of mind that it was done right, and it happens to taste great. So check it out right now at toostrongcoffee.com/TYT.
When somebody's the president of the United States, the authority is total, and that's the way it's got to be.
2020 is everything. Everything will be decided in 2020, and then we'll either have pessimism a long time, or we'll have optimism.
There is some good news when it comes to elections throughout the country, especially for progressives.
He's struggling in polls. He's trailing Joe Biden in many of these battleground states. And he knows that if he makes it difficult for voters to cast their ballots, especially as we're dealing with this pandemic, well, maybe it'll give him an edge over Biden.
We need to get rid of these people who are in office, who enable these systems that continue to oppress us. Start using your votes and your dollars for the people who want to preserve your community and your humanity.
Defiance is what you need in order to fight for what you know is right. The fight never ends.
Progressive candidates come on this show, we help them, and they've at least got a fighter's chance.
Expand the squad.
Here we go, Squad 2.0. Corey Bush, Jamal Bowman.
And this is why what Cenk and the Young Turks are doing is so important.
This time, it's real. If he wins another term, God knows what he'll do to our government, our democracy, and our way of life.
We need solidarity, and it begins with you.
Who's gonna fix it? Who's gonna fix it? Goddamn right. Early voting is well underway all across the country, and we hope you've either already voted or have a plan in place to vote so that you know your vote will count. And while you're at it, let everyone else know how important it is that they get out and vote too, with a vote hat, or a blue NAMI shirt, or any of the other election-themed items currently available at shoptyt.com. Vote and let's make change happen now.
This looks like a conspiracy. This looks like a scheme to defraud.
The Bush administration put folks into the regulatory agencies who believed in destroying regulation.
Memories of the Great Depression faded.
They stood on the floor of the Senate day after day attacking what they were trying to do.
They just generated all this junk, took home huge bonuses, and then when it collapsed, they said, oh, not us.
What they ginned up was pure extortion, putting a gun to the head of Congress.
Time and again, they heard the devastation that was happening in low and moderate income communities caused by bankers, by lenders, and they chose to ignore it.
I understood that the SEC was not merely a weakened version of what it was supposed to be. It was an agent of Wall Street.
When no one's enforcing the law, the criminals take over.
Turn your passions into potential investment opportunities. Whether it's cannabis, fashion, travel, video games, or anything in between, you tell us what you're interested in, and we'll help you uncover the investment potential. Introducing Doe, our newest partner. With Doe, you can be an owner, not just a consumer, with no fees to trade individual stocks. Doe provides your daily one-stop investment shop with lists of companies that relate to your personal interests, relevant news on your favorite stocks, and videos that unpack today's money-moving headlines in under 3 minutes. Go to doe.com/TYT and download today.
Part of the messaging, to get people on board is to, because there's gonna be quite a bit of disinformation, right? I mean, there's disinformation right now in regard to mail-in ballots, what's actually happening at the post office, what Trump is really up to. I mean, there's disinformation about the Bidens, like nonstop. And so I love that you're approaching this from a nonpartisan perspective, because I agree with you. This isn't about partisanship. This is about maintaining and protecting what's left of our democratic process, and that's incredibly important. But is part of the strategy to also counteract the disinformation that comes from these media outlets as well? I know you talked about shutting them down, but you really need the people working at those organizations to agree to shut them down. So what's the strategy in regard to that information or disinformation?
Well, there's a lot of groups, including Protect the Results, including an organization called Hold the Line, that's trying to adjudicate what is accurate information or not. And these folks who sign up on our list, we're trying to be very clear and cautious. There's also a great website that we work with called isthisacoup.com that has the clear red lines that are crossed around that. And it's gonna be messy. It's gonna be confusing for a lot of people. And ultimately, part of what we're trying to do is raise the stakes for going along. And also, one of the other things I wanna say is, in the way this is gonna be punted to the courts regardless, like the Trump administration's been building legal machinery for this for a year. The courts are not apolitical bodies. The way they rule is going to be very different depending on the margin of victory. It's gonna be very different based on the level of activation that people in society had. So when the Supreme Court made its ruling in 2000 to give the election to George W. Bush, even though after the recount happened later, it looked like it really went to Gore, they knew that all of society would go along with their ruling. If society is shut down, they're gonna make a very different calculation about how far they can push it. And so part of the strategy is, through all of the chaos, we're raising the costs to violate democratic norms. We're making it easier for people at all levels of all institutions to defect. And that's the overall strategy that can be applied even through a chaotic situation where there is disinformation, where it's confusing for people, etc. And we're trying to actually have a pretty sober approach. We're not, crying coup at every. We think, for example, it's likely that Trump is going to try to declare victory no matter what happens on election day. That itself does not constitute a coup. What constitutes a coup is, does the machinery of the government go along with it, right? It's not about tweets, it's about, are they stopping the counting of ballots, for example? Are they filling up the courts with all kinds of injunctions, for example? So we're trying to also show the media that there are hundreds of thousands of people in an organized way that are aligned around some red lines and ready to be clear and move strategically, not just aimlessly protest. And instead have clear targets with clear goals where you can participate based on who you are. And so the best way to plug in is to go to choosedemocracy.us. We have training manuals. We're doing trainings that you can move into that are over Zoom. And we're helping people build action plans, build action groups. You don't have to have had any experience with this whatsoever. It's COVID minded, it's de-escalation oriented. It's aware that the right wing is trying to mobilize violence against us. It's rooted in the experience that a lot of us have had in social movements, not just for the last 20 years, which is my experience, but people who, were working in the civil rights movement, facing Ku Klux Klan violence, facing police violence. And so there is a plan in place, but in order for it to work, we need to win a majority of society to participate in it, and people need to get involved in order to make it work.
The de-escalation training is so important. I went through some of it when we went to go cover the Democratic primary debates in Miami, because we knew there were going to be right wingers there who were going to try to harass us and provoke us. And I remember thinking, I don't want to do the de-escalation training, right? If they're going to come for me, I'm going to come for them. But no, it's actually so important, because one of the insane people who came after us was Laura Loomer. And she showed up with one of those, bullhorn things, and was in my ear screaming nonsense. And we just ignored her the entire time. And she looked like, well, exactly what she is, a lunatic. And it didn't escalate, And so It's so important to go through that training, and please, everyone, check out that website, choosedemocracy.us. The Is This a Coup meter is on there. I was on the website earlier today, and I think it's so helpful. And you can sign up, you can take the pledge. I think this is really well thought out, Joshua, and I'm so grateful that you're taking the time to share the details with our audience. And people power. I mean, anytime real change happens in any society, it's not fueled by elites in government. It's done by people who demand change and who demand action. And so, Joshua, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about this today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm optimistic that if we don't shy away from this fight, not only can we win, but in the process actually revitalize our institutions and fully take our democracy back, not just have to defend the ground we stand on right now.
No, I agree with you. Once people understand the kind of power they really have, I think amazing things can happen in this country.
Back on the Young Turks, Cenk and Anna with you, this time with audio. So we had a little bit of a technical issue and some of you couldn't hear the show, but we're back. Real quick, want to remind you guys, obviously tomorrow's election day. We're gonna have coverage starting at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. Don't miss a minute of it. Great progressives will be on here. Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, Nina Turner, and all of our hosts, guest hosts, etc. From all of our different shows. So make sure that you're checking that out. We'll cover it not just in a celebratory way if Trump loses without any hesitation, but also we'll cover those progressive races that you care about. Cara Eastman, Just Democrats, Mike Siegel, Julie Oliver, and so much more. All right, and guys, speaking of progressives, sponsor Plant Your Change does this amazing thing, whether it's any credit card or debit card you have, you can attach this. And if you want to, you round up to the nearest dollar and they plant a tree for you guys. So we can plant so many trees through this and helps begin to save the environment. Take action on your own. So tyt.com/trees. It doesn't have to be from any particular bank. It could be any card you have, and it makes you feel great and actually helps on this most important issue, which is saving the planet. tyt.com/trees. Okay, Anna, we've got so many stories for you, everybody, including unfortunately some of what appears to be Donald Trump's efforts at setting up a strategy to cheat.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you know your candidate is unpopular, that's how you try to win, by cheating and by intimidating people. So Trump supporters over the weekend decided to act as the American Taliban by going after the Trump campaign bus in Texas. This was as the bus was traveling from San Antonio to Austin. Video surfaced showing a number of vehicles with Trump flags and other Trump paraphernalia surrounding the Biden-Harris bus. And at one point, if you watch the video carefully, you can see one of the pickup trucks closely tailgating the car, or the bus, I should say, getting real close, looking like it's trying to intimidate them. And unfortunately, it did lead to some level of intimidation. So in Texas on Friday, Trump supporters surrounded the Biden campaign bus. And in New York and New Jersey on Sunday, Trump supporters halted traffic on 2 major highways. The FBI has confirmed that it is investigating the Texas incident, which Biden described as an effort to run his team off the road. Also, the response from Trump is unsurprising. He has decided to defend these actions, these forms of intimidation, and you shouldn't be shocked by that because he has been egging people on from the beginning. This is what someone does when they know they're unpopular, that people do not want to vote for them. And so he needs to go out of his way to encourage people to essentially engage in these types of acts to discourage people from showing up to the polls and intimidate them. So here's Trump essentially defending these individuals during a rally.
Did you see the way our people, they were protecting his bus yesterday because they're nice. So his bus, they had hundreds of cars, Trump and the American flag. That's it, you see Trump and American flag. Do you ever notice when you see the other side? I don't even see much of the other side. You don't see any, they have no spirit, they have no enthusiasm, they have no nothing. But you know what, I don't see it. But whenever you see like a small group, because it's gotta be small because there's nobody around, nobody cares. But you see these groups, you never see an American flag. I always say, if you look at a group and you don't see the American flag, you know that's the opposition.
What does the American flag really mean when you don't believe in democracy? What's the point of the American flag if you literally go out of your way to intimidate people from exercising their right to vote? The American flag is a piece of cloth. The American flag is supposed to represent something. And Donald Trump and his supporters don't believe in what it represents. They don't believe in freedom. They don't believe in democracy. They don't even believe that their own candidate, their preferred candidate, is popular because they have to stoop to this level to intimidate people from voting, to scare people on the Trump-Harris bus. I mean, the actions that Trump and his supporters have engaged in order to disenfranchise voters, to intimidate voters, to essentially attempt to steal the election and call it a victory for Trump on the night of the election when all the ballots haven't even been counted yet, indicates that they don't believe in what the flag represents. So to them, it's nothing more than a symbol that pretends like they believe in patriotism, pretends like they believe in democracy, but they believe in no such thing. They're as un-American as they can get.
So, two things about this. First of all, if you got a Trump flag and you want to honk as the Biden bus goes by, or you go by it and you point at your Trump flag, nothing wrong with that, right? But if you surround the bus and they got the bus to slow down to 20 miles per hour on a highway, and you're swerving around the bus and you're in essence trying to comment, and I'll go with a middle ground. The Biden campaign says they were trying to drive the bus off the road. I don't know that the Trump people say anything, but yeah, we were trying to intimidate them. So, but commandeer the bus in any way, shape, or form, that's super dangerous. Don't do that. Don't do that to the Biden bus. Don't do it to a Trump bus. Don't do it to anyone with a Trump sign, a Biden sign, etc. When you start affecting the speed and the direction of any other driver on the highway, you're asking for massive trouble. So unsurprisingly, Donald Trump eggs them on because he likes physicality. He likes getting in people's grill, even on the highway, and even in dangerous situations like that. Okay, so if you're MAGA out there right now and going, yeah, that's right, man, this is how you do it. That's right, Trump said it, we believe it. What you do is, if you're a political group, you surround cars or vehicles that you don't agree with on the highway and intimidate them. So I'm sure you guys are all not gonna have any problems if Black Lives Matter surrounds your car with giant Black Lives Matter flags and commandeers your car off a highway. Or if Antifa does that with their Antifa flags and they just surround your car and try to get you to stop in the middle of the highway. I mean, it's not my idea, I think it's a terrible idea. But it's Trump's idea, it's the Republican idea. So when you sign off on it, you don't get to say, no, we peacefully drove your bus off the highway, but you don't get to do that to our cars. No, there is no such thing. Now look, it's of course hypothetical, because there's no way in the world Black Lives Matter cars would do that. And what Antifa, they keep talking about all this dangerous Antifa. I'm not saying there isn't Antifa in the country, there is, right? Have you ever seen an Antifa caravan where they're riding around with their flags and pushing people off? It doesn't exist. And so that's why the thugs in the right wing know this is disproportionate. A lot of the cops are on our side. The president's gonna back us up. So we can either do violence or threaten violence and totally get away with it. And if the other side even does a chant, which is, again, a core First Amendment issue, will threaten to lock them up. So, okay, I know you guys don't believe in justice, and you don't believe in equality, and you don't believe in America. And now on top of that, as Anna pointed out, Trump's out there going, no, we stopped counting on November 3rd. We don't count the votes, don't count the votes. If you're in the party arguing to not count the votes, number one, that means you're not only going to lose, you know you're going to lose. There's no one winning who goes, don't count the votes. So you know already for a fact that you're with the loser, okay? And number two, much more importantly than that, if you think you shouldn't count legally cast votes that came in by election day, you're not an American. You're, in a lot of ways, you're a traitor to the idea of this country. We're not gonna do anything about it. We're not gonna threaten you or intimidate you or anything like that. Just know that you prefer dictatorship and you don't believe in freedom at all. Everything you've ever said about freedom was a total lie. All you want is a dictator like Trump, and you don't believe in a democracy where we count everybody's votes.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, they're disrespectful to our troops. They're disrespecting the flag. They're disrespecting our Constitution. I think this is incredibly disrespectful to the people who have risked their lives and lost their lives to protect our freedoms. Trump supporters, anti-democratic, anti-American, do not believe in our Constitution, do not believe in our right to vote. These are not people who belong in this country. That type of ideology is not supposed to belong in this country. And it didn't just stop with the Biden bus in Texas. There were other incidents as well, incidents that unfortunately are not being investigated, and the local police departments are doing absolutely nothing about it. So on Sunday, for instance, caravans of Trump supporters blockaded the Governor Mario Cuomo Bridge and the Garden State Parkway, snarling traffic on two of the busiest highways in the New York metropolitan area just 2 days before the election. Now the cops are clearly on these American Taliban members' side. William Duffy, a spokesperson, for instance, from the New York State Police, said that troopers had monitored the protests, but there were no arrests. Let me just stop for a second, because if I can recall correctly, I don't know, maybe I have bad memory. I mean, it did happen like yesterday or last week. Whenever there are Black Lives Matter protesters who block the streets, what's the response from cops? Are cops as open-minded about these blockades? Are they cool with it? Are the local citizens in the area cool with it? Is that totally fine? It seems like there's a little bit of a double standard here. When protesters from Black Lives Matter or any other social justice movement step foot on a road and block a car for a second, oh my God, these people, they're awful, they're terrible, you can't do this, you can't do that. You can protest, fine, you right to assemble, but you can't block the roads, you can't block the roads. Oh, but when Trump supporters do it with the very intention of intimidating voters, it's totally fine. Yeah. Let me give you more details. In New Jersey, for instance, there was a caravan of Trump supporters who snarled traffic on the northbound lanes of the Garden State Parkway near the Chesapeake Services area in South Amboy. And so we have a video of that. Let's just take a quick look, and then Cenk, you jump in.
Yeah. Woo! We shut it down, baby. We shut it down. We shut it down. We shut it down.
All right, couple things here, guys. First of all, Anna's 100% right. If left-wing protesters ever block a highway, people lose their minds. How dare they? This is not a right way to protest. They should all be arrested. When they block a highway, yeah, we shut it down, man, it's awesome. Okay, they just have no effort at parity, equality, because they just fundamentally don't care about justice. They just say, I want to be above you. I don't want to be your equal. And I don't want to have the same rights as you, otherwise, how would I compete? Because it's basically an admission by MAGA losers that they can't compete in a free market in an open society. So they're like, well, I should have more rights than you. I should get to shut down the highway, but you shouldn't. Well, how do you square that with American ideas? I don't care, I want a dictator. I got it, I understand. And remember, some state legislatures that were Republican, heavily Republican, even proposed bills to let you run down protesters in the highway and kill them. They say, oh, well, if they're in front of your car, we're gonna give you immunity from any kind of liability if you run them over. And you know what happens when you run someone over with your car, as we saw in Charlottesville, they die. And so left-wing protesters were gonna kill in the streets, and we're gonna try to give you immunity. Right-wing protesters shut down highways, drive people off of the roads, or intimidate them. Oh, that's rock and roll. No, it isn't. It's a bad idea. It's a terrible idea. And finally, speaking of terrible idea, you're gonna do this in New Jersey. You're gonna do it in New York. You're gonna do it in Texas. One day you're gonna block the wrong dude, and so you're there. I don't want it. I think that'll be a epic disaster, but you're begging for that disaster. I mean, with all the guys in Jersey and Texas and all those places, and I mean, it doesn't even have to be political. Okay, what if they got a medical emergency? What if they're trying to get to their sister's wedding? What if anything, and you're blocking them and going, yeah, man, I got trouble. And let's just, whether they might even be on your side, but even if they're not on your side and they got a safety issue or whatever it is, you guys are nuts, man. You're asking for massive trouble, and I don't want anybody to get that kind of trouble. And that's why Trump's a menace, for them, and he's got to go so that we stop fighting in the streets, which is exactly what he's encouraging us to do. As Anna showed you, literally, he's egging these guys on twice on Twitter. He's like, yeah, go get them.
And if Antifa or whatever surrounded his bus, he'd wet himself. Oh, where's my bunker? Arrest them all. We know what kind of a coward you are.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And look, if someone does get hurt on the Trump side, you know what'll happen. They'll cry about how they're victims, how they're targeted. Oh, we get targeted. Remember how much they cried about how they were allegedly targeted for being Trump supporters? I mean, what are they doing right? And I don't believe that for a second. Someone would say something critical of them online because they're Trump supporters and they would cry about it. But look at what they're doing. They're engaging physically in a way that can really hurt someone. And we've already seen protesters get gunned down by Trump supporters at various protests, like in Kenosha, Wisconsin, for instance. And so no matter what happens to them, they're either the victims or they're the so-called patriots. They're the ones who allegedly believe in democracy in America the most. Everything they claim to be, just understand that they are the opposite. But the most important takeaway from this, for me at least, is the fact that they know that they're losers, that they support a losing candidate, and they have to resort to these types of tactics in order to give their loser candidate a shot at winning. And that's pretty sad. Betas. Anyway, let's move on to some other unfortunate violence that took place over the weekend. A peaceful protest ended in violence in North Carolina after cops decided to use pepper spray, which they did use on children as young as 3. The participants in Saturday's I Am Change March had intended to conclude at an early voting site to emphasize turnout in the final days of the presidential campaign. Those plans were thrown into disarray when law enforcement officers in riot gear and gas masks insisted demonstrators move off the street and clear county property despite a permit authorizing their presence. So they're following the rules. This is not an unlawful assembly by any means. People who were part of this march included family members of George Floyd, parents of Christian Griggs, who was a black man who was killed by his father-in-law, his white father-in-law back in 2013. And so as tensions escalated, officers deployed pepper spray and began making arrests. Among those caught in clouds of the irritant were children as young as 3 years old, as well as elderly residents and a disabled woman. Here's what the scene looked like.
Get back up!
So as you see toward the end of that video, just cops indiscriminately spraying pepper spray into the crowd. Again, these are people who had the permit, had the permission necessary to be there for this peaceful protest. And it wasn't even about protesting cops. The whole point was to emphasize the need to get out the vote. And this is the kind of violence they were met with. At the same time, by the way, let me remind you all, over the weekend, there were multiple instances of Trump supporters intimidating voters. They've blocked roads in states like New York, New Jersey. In Texas, a Biden campaign bus was surrounded by Trump supporters. Biden claims that they were trying to run the bus off the road. But local law enforcement decided to do absolutely nothing. The only situation in which there was any form of law enforcement investigating the matter was when the FBI confirmed that they were looking into what happened in Texas.
All right, so when Martin Luther King protested and others in the civil rights movement in the 1960s, King actually gave a speech that not a lot of people have heard that was really thoughtful about what they were doing with civil disobedience. And what he explained, and unfortunately, even to this day, I don't think the press or historians even quite explain this right, is that actually they weren't breaking the law at all. The federal law was on the side of the civil rights protesters. And the local sheriffs and police departments and governors were refusing to obey those laws that were passed. So it was actually, at the time, the racist governors, the racist sheriff's offices, et cetera, that were breaking the law. And Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement were doing civil disobedience to get them to follow the law. Now, what of course everybody saw was the dogs attacking them, the cops attacking them, and them being carried away to jail. But all of that was illegal activity by in that case, the cops, not the protesters. And same thing here. They have a legal permit to protest in that area. They went through all of the right tracks, and that's what every time when they go to bust open a protest with batons and pepper spray, et cetera, the excuse they use is, well, you didn't have a permit. I mean, you got a First Amendment right, kind of, until my baton hits your head. But I'm gonna get around your First Amendment right by saying you didn't get a permit. In this case, they got a permit. That it was definitely for that exact area, and no one disputes that. And they decided they were gonna break up the protest anyway. And you're never gonna guess this, but it turns out the sheriff's office there in the past has been charged with discriminatory policing. Huh, I would have never guessed. And that pepper spray you saw right there in the video, they say, well, it's not exactly pepper spray. It's, quote, pepper-based vapor. Oh, I see. Yeah, that makes it much better.
Oh, okay. Pepper-based vapor. Like, oh, how delightful. That sounds great. By the way, so I think it's important to go to some of these videos because there were witnesses there. One of them is a congressional candidate who witnessed what happened. So he's gonna describe the scene for you. Let's take a quick look at that.
My eyes are full of pepper spray because, we were peacefully demonstrating. We were exercising our First Amendment rights with Black Lives Matter, and what I've witnessed is what is happening all over America. This is wrong. People should be allowed to show up, to exercise their rights to vote. We're all taxpayers. The police work for us. Yet today I witnessed pepper spray, chemical weapons being sprayed on my fellow Americans.
And that was Scott Huffman, who is running for a congressional seat in North Carolina.
So look, it's so important for veterans to come out and support these protests because unfortunately a big chunk of America is sick. And so when they see a black person telling them what the police did, they automatically disqualify them in their minds and say, oh, I bet he's lying. All black people are always lying about the police. Millions upon millions of African Americans, according to right wingers, are all liars. They all tell the same lie. And those poor cops, I mean, their head was asking for the baton or the pepper-based vapor, right? And so that's why a veteran like that coming out and explaining what actually happened, it sucks. But unfortunately, a lot of white people in this country will go, oh, maybe it's true, because he said it. And so thank you for being a good ally. And then you got 3-year-olds getting pepper sprayed there. And it's because you know why? Because, oh, don't bring your 3-year-old, but they had a permit. I mean, yeah, you bring your family when you got a permit and there's no reason for the cops to attack you until they do. And so finally, one of the other guys that they were actually mentioning in the speeches was from way back in the day. It was from 1870, and back then he was a black town commissioner. So this is right after the Civil War ends. 5 years later, he's a town commissioner. He got elected. He has the awesome name Wyatt Outlaw, but he was actually part of the elected government. The KKK dragged him out of his house and lynched him right where that courthouse is. And in that square, they have an ode to the Confederate soldiers who were on the side of the lynching. And that's where the protest was happening. So these cops in a department that's already been charged with discriminatory policing illegally raid a protest of African Americans, violently attack them in a place with a giant ode to Confederate soldiers where a black legislator had been lynched before. So here we are in the year 2020, and a day before one of the momentous elections in American history,
this stuff is still happening?
Well, it's interesting to juxtapose what average Americans who believe in democracy are experiencing and what Trump and his supporters are experiencing. So let's talk about that a little bit. So as protesters across the country and people who just want to exercise their right to vote are dealing with intimidation tactics by Trump supporters, Trump himself is ensuring that the White House is boarded up and the bunker is ready to go for Election Day. Now, of course, Trump is expecting some protests to take place. We're really uncertain whether there really will be any type of violence breaking out. But a lot of the fear regarding violence has to do with the possibility of Trump losing the election and his supporters losing their minds as a result. But nonetheless, he wants to give this aesthetic of, oh, we need to be worried about left-wingers and Antifa attacking. So federal authorities are expected to put back into place a non-scalable fence around the entire perimeter of the White House as law enforcement and other agencies prepare for possible protests surrounding the election. The fence is actually the exact same fence that was put up during the protests that took place over the summer following the murder of George Floyd. And if you guys can recall, that was when Trump also decided to hide out in his bunker. And then when he emerged, he needed to hide behind federal authorities and federal agents who rained terror on protests and protesters in Washington, D.C. So the extra layer of security marks the most high profile example to date of authorities preparing for unrest following this year's election, particularly if there's no clear winner come November 4th. And to be sure, Trump has demanded that the winner of the election be declared on the night of the election, which is unlikely to happen because of the influx of mail-in ballots. Also last week, Immigration and Customs Enforcement was also putting its agents on standby, while Customs and Border Protection was training its personnel in the lead up to Election Day. Additionally, 250 National Guardsmen have been put on standby, reporting to Metro Police officials. So there are more details, Cenk, but I really think that this is an attempt to, I think, scare people, to put out this message of, ooh, it's gonna be dangerous on Election Day, so don't get out the vote. But fortunately, about 70% of likely voters have already cast their ballots, which is pretty incredible.
Well, you got to give Trump credit. He said he was gonna build a wall, and he finally built a wall around himself.
It's a big, beautiful wall.
Yeah, well, and now America has devolved so much underneath Donald Trump that the president of the United States has to build a giant fence around the White House so that the people don't come in when he tries to steal an election. And this is what dictators do. They build really high walls around their palace so that the people of their countries that know that they're dictators don't storm the palace. Maybe Trump will even get his wish. You remember there was a story about how several different people inside the Trump administration said that when they were talking about building the fence along the Mexican border, that Trump talked about building a moat along the entire border filled with crocodiles and snakes. And by the way, electrified fencing, and I don't know if he was gonna throw in sharks with frickin' laser beams on their heads. But maybe he could do it around the White House. Hey, we got some mother effing snakes at the mother effing White House, apparently, if Trump gets his way. But this is not how a democracy is supposed to look like. And Trump keeps saying, oh, wait till you see what happened in Biden's America. This is Trump's America. How does it look? It looks disastrous. And the reality is, if he does basically attempt a coup where he has lost the election and he refuses to leave, likely the Secret Service or the military will escort him out. If they don't escort him out, they probably are gonna need that fence.
Yeah, let me just be clear about something. I am not in any way waiting for anyone in any position of power to do the right thing. I'm just not. And so there's a wonderful plan. It's called choosedemocracy.us, choosedemocracy.us. In the event that Donald Trump stages a coup,
There is organizing taking place right now, and if you go to that website, you can learn about how that organizing will take place. Joshua Kahn Russell, who's a friend of mine and has done his round of interviews on this topic, including on The Conversation, really detailed how this will happen. Look, people power. We really need to rely on people power. Sitting back and waiting for the Secret Service or any government agency to do the right thing, I think that is incredibly naive and short-sighted. I have no faith in them whatsoever. They have allowed Donald Trump to get away with murder, literally in some cases. So it's all about people power. Please go to choosedemocracy.us.
Well, I'll throw in one more website. So if he clearly loses, this is not in any scenario where he wins or it's in dispute. If he clearly loses and he refuses to leave, and the Secret Service, et cetera, refuses to show him out the door, basically, we have a petition at tyt.com/remove Trump. So somebody at some point has to restore democracy. So they are the Republicans. It's not just Donald Trump. Donald Trump has said it now half a dozen times, publicly, clearly on the record. He says, I don't want you to count votes past November 3rd. It doesn't matter if they're legal. It doesn't matter that they came in before election day. I don't want you to count them. So he's saying, I don't believe in democracy. If I can, I'm gonna try to stop the election before you can count the votes. If I ever have a lead, I'm gonna call it. That's what dictators do. So tyt.com/remove Trump. If it turns out he's clearly lost and he won't leave, yeah, if you don't surround the building, it's not gonna create any political pressure for people to escort him out the building. I mean, it's an insane world if people try to clear that fence. Don't do that, okay? But you need to show up in massive force to send a message if he's trying to do a coup and won't leave the building.
We got to take a break. When we come back, we have more news for you, including Glenn Greenwald resigning from The Intercept. We'll tell you why and give you the response from Intercept co-founders. We'll be right back.
Are you a politician with a ridiculous point to make? Are you in need of a petulant, outdated way to make it? Then you'll need one of my signs. Hi, I'm Simon Simonson of Simonson Signs. We'll take the stupid, over-the-top, meaningless allegory you have and put it on foam core. So maybe someone will notice your grandstanding, because this is C-SPAN, and anything that's not people milling around in front of a running vote count is almost considered moderately entertaining. The bar is low, just like our prices. We've got plenty of designs. We also brought you Mike Lee's Tauntauns. They're tons of fun. What does this have to do with the Green New Deal? About as much as this other visual aid he used of Reagan on a T-Rex. Or is that a Velociraptor? Who cares? Who the cares? No one gives. Call us now at Simon Simonson Signs. We'll make your stupid point stupidly for money today.
Viewers had asked for an interview with the TYT Lizard. Mr. Lizard. Oh, you changed colors today. Nice. I don't even know how you feel about us. Do you even like us?
Well, you guys made me this awesome house, so I'm kind of in your debt. I was found outside on the street, and you gave me a home. Granted, it was a really crappy home for a while, but then through the power of fundraising, I became a person who has a multi-level Trump-style mansion.
You do. By the way, you never looked better, man. Normally, you're just green or just brown, but today you're in mid-lizard, right?
I'm not very smart. I'm a lizard, so I don't know how the science works. I guess this is just my mood. It's not every day that thresholds like this are broken. I'm just so excited. I can't contain my pigmentation.
And now you're showing it off.
Yep.
Yeah, I've never seen the lizard like this before. That's 300 million. That's a pretty good number. We were doing a press release on it, and I got all worked up. And I said, okay, well, that's the size of the US population. You know what our next target is? The size of the entire world.
world on the road to 6 billion. Although by the time we hit it, it'll probably be 7, maybe 8 billion.
Not a big deal. A couple of days ago on the TYT network, we passed 1 billion views.
What the hell?
What the hell?
That's a big freaking deal.
2 billion views.
What now?
Sorry.
What did we do? 2 billion?
2 billion.
They said it couldn't be done, but it was done.
We just crossed 5 billion views on YouTube.
I mean, imagine 10 years ago thinking one day.
We looked at you like, are you nuts? Young Turks crosses 6 billion views.
Young Turks has just passed another milestone, 10 billion views.
Damn.
I just shot a clip. It's time sensitive and it needs to be edited right now.
Did anybody call for an editor?
Need this in an hour.
But you're an editor too.
All right, back on Young Turks. Remember, it's so important to keep us sustainable, strong, and get the progressive message out there. So please go to tyt.com/go to make that happen. And you guys have been amazing so far. We love doing this show with you guys. And we also have a new sponsor. If you want a free 7-day trial to protect your internet, go to tyt.com/purevpn. tyt.com/purevpn. And the folks who are members are the Young Turks. And well, we got a new ticker for you guys, and you're seeing some of your comments below, and you're seeing the names of the folks that signed up on YouTube by clicking the join button right below the video. It's so easy, and it really helps a tremendous amount. So I'll just read the upgrades for you guys. Enix Sound, Carl Ingalls, and Lisa G upgraded their accounts, and you'll be able to get the post game we're gonna do in just a couple of minutes here for you guys at the essentials level when you upgrade. And speaking of the post game, I'm gonna answer this question in the post game because it's very important. Douglas Brown used Super Chat to ask, Cenk, do you honestly think Biden has the same chance to win Pennsylvania as he does DC? If not, your call that neo-fascist orangutan has no chance is bunk. It's also bad to say this as you have a following and overconfidence depresses voting. So I think that is wrong on several counts, and it's actually really important that you not go around saying it's a close election when it is not a close election. And we'll talk more about that in the post game. tyt.com/join. If you're watching anywhere else to become a member and get that post game on YouTube, you can just hit the join button below and get the essentials level to get the post games. Anna, let's keep going with a story that's very related to that.
All right. We all know that Donald Trump has done anything and everything necessary to give him an edge and steal the election. He's dismantled the post office. He has put out all sorts of disinformation about mail-in voting. His supporters have intimidated voters both at the polls and on the roads. But now it turns out that Trump has actually vocalized with some of the people close to him that he plans on declaring a premature victory before all the ballots are counted. And so Axios broke this story, and I want to give you a few excerpts and then give you Trump's denial, which actually isn't much of a denial. So as Jonathan Swan from Axios reports, Trump has privately talked through this scenario in some detail in the last few weeks, describing plans to walk up to the podium on election night and declare he has won. Trump's team is preparing to falsely claim that mail-in ballots counted after November 3rd, a legitimate count expected to favor Democrats, are evidence of election fraud. So in Pennsylvania, state law also, and this is important to keep in mind, prevents election officials from counting mail-in ballots before election day. So they're gonna begin counting those ballots on election day. And when you think about the influx of mail-in ballots, you can understand why some are not expecting Pennsylvania to have the final results of the election on the night of the election. And also keep in mind that Pennsylvania is an incredibly important state, a state that polls indicate Biden is winning in.
All right, so I'm gonna expose the hypocrisy of Trump super easily and all of his followers. So yes, Pennsylvania takes a while to count because they're not allowed to count until the polls close. But other states count early and are pretty good at counting. So those states are Florida, North Carolina, and Ohio among the swing states. So everybody knows that the registered Democrats have sent in mail-in ballots at a far, far greater pace than registered Republicans. So it is likely that Biden will have a lead in the beginning in those states. In fact, Florida is counting right now. They start a day ahead and we're a day before the election. So they're gonna have a ton of mail-in votes ready to go and might announce huge results as early as 8 o'clock Eastern tomorrow. By the way, don't miss our election day coverage. We'll be going from 1 p.m. Eastern all the way through the night. And we'll give you all of those. But is Trump and all of his followers, are you guys all okay with if the Donald Trump rule, no counting past November 3rd? So if the clock hits 12 o'clock and Biden is leading in Ohio, Florida, and North Carolina because they counted mail-in votes first, is it over? Is the election over? That's it? You're not allowed to count any more votes in those states? Now, you all know that you would never, ever agree to that. And you know why you wouldn't agree to it? Because it's not fair, it's not right. The people who voted, if they're people that are abroad because they're service members in the military, should their vote count? Of course! If people got their vote in time by election day and the states have different rules. By the way, you can go to tyt.com/investigates and we broke down for you guys which states count fast, which count slow, which have already started counting. It's a really great guide for you guys, okay? So the Trump people never agree to not counting their votes, but they're saying with a straight face, we don't want to count your votes. And so if Trump is leading at any point, we want to stop the count and not count any more of those votes. Well, that's the definition of cheating, and that's the definition of being against democracy. That makes you un-American, and I'm sure you'd enjoy Saudi Arabia and other dictatorships across the world, but this country ain't for you, okay? So here, we believe in democracy and we believe in America, but it's not the first time that conservatives in this country have rebelled against America because they didn't like democracy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And when Trump was asked about it, he gave a weird denial/non-denial, latest edition of Chopper Talk. Let's hear what he had to say.
That was a false report. Well, look at what happens. I think it's a terrible thing when ballots can be collected after an election. I think it's a terrible thing when people or states are allowed to tabulate ballots for a long period of time after the election is over. Because it can only lead to one thing, and that's very bad. You know what that thing is. I think it's a very dangerous, terrible thing. And I think it's terrible when we can't know the results of an election the night of the election in a modern day age of computer. I think it's a terrible thing. And I happen to think it was a terrible decision for our country made by the Supreme Court. I think it was a terrible decision for our country. And I think it's a very dangerous decision because you're going to have 1 or 2 or 3 states, depending on how it ends up, where they're tabulating ballots, and the rest of the world is waiting to find out. And I think there's great danger to it, and I think a lot of fraud and misuse can take place. I think it's a terrible decision by the Supreme Court, a terrible decision. Now, I don't know if that's going to be changed because we're going to go in the night of, as soon as that election's over, we're going in with our lawyers. But we don't want to have Pennsylvania where you have a political governor, a very partisan guy. And we don't want to have other states like Nevada where you have the head of the Democratic clubhouse as your governor. We don't want to be in a position where he's allowed to every day watch ballots come in. Gee, we could only find 10,000 more ballots.
So there you have it. You have Donald Trump stating clearly and multiple times for everyone in America that he doesn't believe that voting is right. He doesn't believe that counting every ballot is okay. In fact, he thinks it's a terrible thing. He thinks democracy is a terrible thing. And he will repeat the word terrible 28 times in the same interview because his vocabulary is limited to like 3 or 4 words. But yeah, he thinks democracy is terrible. He does not want to count every vote. And he has never provided any evidence of election fraud related to mail-in ballots. He votes by mail himself, his entire family votes by mail. And so I guess what's good for his family is not okay for the rest of America because he doesn't believe in democracy. He wants to steal the election.
So Trump's campaign in 2016 in several states asked for the vote to go on longer. They said, you have got to count all the mail-in ballots. Now they're turning around and saying, I'm gonna send in my lawyers so you don't count mail-in ballots. But last time you asked to count them and you asked to stay as long as it took to count them. I know, but I'm trying to cheat this time. And so it's a terrible thing that you don't let me cheat. It's a terrible thing that we have a democracy. Guys, tomorrow it is possible, and certainly within this week, it is likely that the election is gonna get called against Donald Trump because he's losing very badly and he knows it. Nobody who thinks they're winning is desperate to not count the votes. He knows for a fact that he's losing and he's gonna get humiliated. And when that election is called, and I start a sentence with down goes, it's gonna be such an enormous moment of relief for the whole country. Not because we disagree with his policies, that's terrible enough. No, because we get rid of this plague upon the land of this pathological liar, narcissist who would destroy this country, including ending our democracy. He says it's a terrible thing to tabulate the votes after an election. No, it's a terrible thing not to tabulate the votes after an election. That's what dictators do. You un-American piece of crap. I can't wait to see you lose and then get humiliated politically, financially, and eventually legally. Tune in tomorrow here to see that happen. All right, speaking of which, we have more updates on the election, the polling, all in the post game right now. tyt.com/join or hit the join button below. We'll see you there. You know what the progressive movement needs? It needs a little energy, a little pizzazz, maybe a little caffeine. Oh, coffee. But what if it was too strong coffee? Yes, new, twostrongcoffee.com/TYT. Look, this helps progressive causes. It's also organic and fair trade, so you've got peace of mind that it was done right, and it happens to taste great. So check it out right now at twostrongcoffee.com/TYT.
When somebody's the president of the United States, the authority is total, and that's the way it's gotta be.
2020 is everything. Everything will be decided in 2020, and then we'll either have pessimism a long time, or we'll have optimism.
There is some good news when it comes to elections throughout the country, especially for progressives.
He's struggling in polls. He's trailing Joe Biden in many of these battleground states. And he knows that if he makes it difficult for voters to cast their ballots, especially as we're dealing with this pandemic, well, maybe it'll give him an edge over Biden.
We need to get rid of these people who are in office, who enable these systems that continue to oppress us. Start using your votes and your dollars for the people who want to preserve your community and your humanity.
Defiance is what you need in order to fight for what you know is right. The fight never ends.
Progressive candidates come on this show, we help them, and they've at least got a fighter's chance.
Expand the squad.
Here we go, Squad 2.0. Corey Bush, Jamal Bowman.
And this is why what Cenk and the Young Turks are doing is so important.
This time, it's real. If he wins another term, God knows what he'll do to our government, our democracy, and our way of life.
We need solidarity, and it begins with you.
Who's gonna fix it? Who's gonna fix it? Goddamn right.
Early voting is well underway all across the country, and we hope you've either already voted or have a plan in place to vote so that you know your vote will count. And while you're at it, let everyone else know how important it is that they get out and vote too, with a vote hat or a blue NAMI shirt or any of the other election-themed items currently available at shoptyt.com. Vote and let's make change happen now.
This looks like a conspiracy. This looks like a scheme to defraud.
The Bush administration put folks into the regulatory agencies who believed in destroying regulations.
Memories of the Great Depression faded.
They stood on the floor of the Senate day after day attacking what they were trying to do.
They just generated all this junk, took home huge bonuses, and then when it collapsed, they said, oh, not us.
What they ginned up was pure extortion, putting a gun to the head of Congress.
Time and again, they heard the devastation that was happening in low and moderate income communities caused by bankers, by lenders, and they chose to ignore it.
I understood that the SEC was not merely a weakened version of what it was supposed to be. It was an agent of Wall Street.
When no one's enforcing the law, the criminals take over.
All right, back on the Young Turks post game. Cenk and Anna with you guys. Before we get started on some of these stories, I wanted to answer that super chat question that came in. Cenk, why do you have such a high level of confidence? Partly, I already did a video on the polling earlier today, which you should check out, and that explains why I'm so confident. There's a bunch of total BS polls in there that are right-wing pollsters with hilarious excuses for why they think Trump, why their numbers are 8 to 10 points off of any other official polls. They're ridiculous. So, but guys, most importantly, when you pretend that the election is close when it isn't, according to the numbers, you accidentally help Trump's case because Trump wants to say, oh, it's a super close election. The results say I got blown out? No way. Well, obviously it's wrong. Even all the Democrats, all the media told you it was close. Since they told you it was close and now they're telling you it's a blowout, they must be lying. It's all fake news. So I'm just going to stay in office. It's important to stick with the facts. Facts matter. And if you think you're doing brilliant strategery, you're often wrong about that. And when was the last time the Democrats ever did brilliant strategery? And there was one last part of that message that was sent in. It'll depress voter turnout. No, look, that was a massive problem in 2016. I pointed out. Hillary Clinton kept saying, "Don't ever say that I can't win. I'm going to win. I'm going to win. It's a foregone conclusion. I'm like, how does that help you? That depresses your voter turnout. I made that point in 20. You can go back and watch the clips. I yell at them. What are you doing, right? But in this case, they're making the opposite mistake. Biden's lead is much larger, and they're all going around going, "Oh my God, it's so close! It's so close!" You know, and so if the results come in as the polling indicates, and Trump loses Wisconsin, Minnesota, et cetera, by 10 points, everybody's going to be convinced that it was fake. Stop it! Stop it! Report the real numbers. And so it's not good strategy, and it just isn't true. So everybody's on pins and needles about Pennsylvania. The polls that have Trump theoretically up are comical. It's the Trafalgar group that I explained in the earlier video about oh yeah, we're counting shy Trump voters. How do you just determine whether they're shy? Based on what their neighbors say. Come on. Total nonsense, right? Other polls have Biden with a comfortable lead in Pennsylvania, let alone the fact that Biden is currently leading in North Carolina and Arizona and Florida. If he wins any of those states, it's already over before you even get to Pennsylvania. Trump has to win Texas, then Georgia, Iowa, then he's got to win North Carolina, Arizona, Florida, Ohio. And if we stop there, he still loses the election. On top of all those wins, where he's trailing in almost all of those states except Iowa and Texas, on top of that, he's got to win Pennsylvania. Pretending it's a close election is not helpful. Okay, all right, Anna, let's do the rest of the stories.
All right, well, so this next story is something that I wanted to give myself some time to think about clearly, and I have some thoughts. So Glenn Greenwald, who is one of the 3 co-founders of The Intercept, decided to step down from the publication, citing differences with his editors. I want to be clear that he had a contract indicating that he did not have to deal with editors, that he would be able to essentially publish stories without having to deal with what most journalists have to deal with, which is an editor who fact checks and has disagreements about what's going to be published. Now, it looks like Greenwald had a number of issues prior to this one situation kind of blowing up, but it had to do with the Hunter Biden story and the email leaks, and we've talked about it in great detail. Glenn Greenwald wanted to publish a story about it, and his editor had some disagreements about the way it was written. And so finally, Greenwald decided to step down, and he wrote a pretty lengthy piece in Substack explaining why. So I'm gonna walk you through everything and then also give you the response from Jeremy Scahill, who's also one of the other co-founders. But let's start off with a few excerpts from Greenwald's piece. He says, modern media outlets do not air dissent, they quash it. So censorship of my article, rather than engagement with it, was the path these Biden supporting editors chose. The current iteration of The Intercept is completely unrecognizable when compared to the original vision. Rather than offering a venue for airing dissent, marginalized voices, and unheard perspectives, it is rapidly becoming just another media outlet with mandated ideological and partisan loyalties, a rigid and narrow range of permitted viewpoints, a deep fear of offending hegemonic cultural liberalism and center-left Twitter luminaries, and an overarching need to secure the approval and admiration of the very mainstream media outlets we created The Intercept to oppose, critique, and subvert. The Intercept has all but abandoned its core mission of challenging and poking at, rather than appeasing and comforting the institutions and guardians most powerful in its cultural and political circles. And so he also published the email exchanges between himself and the editor here. The editor is Peter Moss. And so Moss had written to him the following after reading a draft of Glenn Greenwald's article. It's very significant that the Journal found, meaning the Wall Street Journal, found no corroborating evidence either of Joe Biden's involvement in any such deals or those deals being consummated. These are major issues that I feel undermine the draft's thesis and are downplayed in the draft. In addition, I feel there are I feel there are substantive problems with the way you present the material on Ukraine. As your draft notes at one point, it is true that no evidence, including these new emails, constitute proof that Biden's motive in demanding Shokin's, that was the prosecutor who was fired in Ukraine, Shokin's termination was to benefit Burisma. And as you guys know, Burisma was the Ukrainian gas company that Hunter Biden was serving on the board of. However, there are many places in the piece where you say that the material raises questions, serious questions about Biden's motives, yet you never present any evidence that supports such questions. So I gotta be honest, I mean, after digging deep into that story ourselves, and we did cover it on the Young Turks, I agree with Peter Moss and his interpretation of the story and the lack of evidence. And so I just found this particular issue to be a strange one, for a strange hill for Glenn Greenwald to die on, right? And that's just a figure of speech. Like, he's gonna be fine. He's gonna do well. He's broken incredibly important stories, including what happened in Brazil with Bolsonaro's justice minister. He's broken stories, of course, in the United States about NSA spying, the leaks by Edward Snowden. So I think he's gonna be fine. But I don't think this one story and the disagreements he had with Peter Moss is the real reason why he decided to step down. There had been some pretty serious disagreements between Glenn Greenwald and The Intercept previously, and I'll get to those details in just a second. But before I filibuster this story, Cenk, I wanted to get your thoughts so far.
Yeah, so look, guys, you need balance. So our editors at the major papers and certainly on cable news stations problematic in what they allow as acceptable thought? Absolutely. So Glenn Greenwald has been right about that for a long time about the spectrum of acceptable thought. I wrote an article probably about 15 years ago on Huffington Post called "Fire the Editors," because oftentimes the reporters do a fine job. They go up to the editors, and it's like, it doesn't fit our narrative. They'll say that even about op-eds. Well, dude, that's because it's not your narrative, it's mine. That's why it's an op-ed, not an article. But they say that all the time with a straight face because they have a narrative. But that's, if you're doing the news, how would you know what the narrative is for tomorrow? It seems very counter to what the news should be. So overall, we agree with Glenn on that phenomenon. But do you, on the other end of the spectrum, do you need editors? Of course, you shouldn't have editors that are quashing things and certainly dissent. But you need editors to fact check. You need editors to check your spelling and your grammar. And my editors, whenever I've had them, have been incredibly helpful. So if you see someone saying, I don't need no stinking editors ever, it's a little bit of a red flag. Because if you've set up the system right, they should be helpful and not detract from what you're doing. And here the editors could have helped. Yeah, sorry, Anna, you were gonna say something?
No, I think that's right. The ideal situation is having an editor who doesn't try to censor you in any way, but collaborates to kind of save you from your own biases. Because, and I think Glenn Greenwald appreciates this. I mean, he's said it on the record many times. Regardless of where you work, what your ideology, like, all of us have biases that can steer us in the wrong direction. I know that that's happened with me. That's happened with everyone who works in news. We're humans, we're flawed, we can make mistakes. And so in an ideal situation, you collaborate with your editor in a way where you get to publish your piece, but you publish your piece in a way where it's foolproof, right? And in this particular case, I mean, Glenn Greenwald himself admits that there's a lack of evidence to incriminate Joe Biden. And there is, I read his piece that, the piece that didn't end up getting published in The Intercept, and there is some innuendo in there. So I can understand some of the reservations that Peter Moss had in this situation. But again, I really want to emphasize that this isn't just about the disagreement regarding the Joe Biden, Hunter Biden article. There had been some pretty serious disagreements earlier. For instance, Glenn Greenwald is pretty outspoken against woke culture, and he felt that there was a lot of that within The Intercept. I know that there have been a few articles published in The Intercept that I don't agree with, but to argue that The Intercept is cozying up to people in positions of power or the Democratic Party, I mean, they're the ones who did such a fantastic job in detailing what happened to Alex Morse, for instance. And that was a series of articles that were incredibly critical of the Democratic establishment. And the list goes on and on. And so I don't like that characterization of The Intercept. I think this is more of a long-standing disagreement between Glenn Greenwald and some of the editors there. Including this article that was published about Reality Winner, who was, I should say, an NSA employee. She was an NSA linguist, and she had actually leaked some documents over to The Intercept. And the reporters who worked on that piece were a little careless, to say the least, and accidentally revealed the source of the leak. And as a result, Reality Winner is now serving a 5-year, 3-month prison sentence. And so I can understand the frustration in a situation like that. So I bring that up because it's not just, I don't think it's just about this Biden story.
Yeah, look, so we've asked Glenn to come on the show and talk it through. But right now, I see valid points on both sides, and I'm not doing both sides. I'm going to give you my opinion on this story in a second. So first of all, I agree with Glenn on the Lee Fang so-called controversy and the absurd cancel culture that went after him on that. I don't want to get into all the details of that. We've covered that before, but Lee Fang is an excellent reporter. Any charges against him I thought were preposterous. So I'm glad he's backing Lee on that, and he should. On the other hand, to say that The Intercept is just going along with the mainstream in Washington is absurd. They've done the best reporting on progressive candidates and establishment Democratic candidates in the country. I would say honestly, bar none. And Alex Morse is just one of the examples. They just broke stories about Don Bacon, who's in a race with Cara Eastman and his corruption. He broke a story in the both in the Pam Keith race and the Mike Siegel race. I mean, especially the Washington Bureau led by Ryan Grim. And here I'll be clear, Ryan Grim also is a TYT contributor, and Glenn also complimented Ryan even in his piece criticizing The Intercept, but they've done brilliant work. And here's another piece of balance, and it's not to say, oh, okay, he said, she said. You really do need balance in these situations. So a company needs a certain degree of bureaucracy that a disruptor like Glenn Greenwald might always be uncomfortable with. Why do they need bureaucracy? Well, they need to have standards and they need to have clear rules. If you're gonna have a lot of employees, you don't want to apply different standards to different employees. That's a legal problem, and that's arguably a moral problem, an ideological problem. So you need rules, and if you have rules, you need a certain degree of bureaucracy. You hope that you don't have too much bureaucracy, but there is a need for rules, and you would think that progressives would understand that. And so I think that Glenn's appreciation for that is not healthy enough, right? He thinks, I'm just gonna do it my way, come hell or high water. And that's, I think, part of the core reason for this split. But finally, to come back to this story, he's far too sure about things that he doesn't have enough evidence about, in my opinion. He says that the fact that the documents regarding Hunter Biden cannot be verified is blatantly false. I don't think it's blatantly false at all. Now, it's an interesting debate whether you could consider them verified or not verified. But just because somebody testified that Hunter Biden actually gave it in and said, oh, I'm blind, but yeah, he gave it to me. By the way, that guy changed the story in the first place. And now that trusting his second story, I don't see how that makes it perfectly verified. Somebody else involved in that transaction also said that email existed. Yeah, that guy's a giant Trump supporter, and who was trying to do even in his own account, do a disreputable deal with China. So I wouldn't say the story's not at all verified, but I certainly wouldn't say the story's verified. And I wouldn't want a giant story going, oh my God, what a huge earthquake here in this election. And honestly, Glenn is obsessed with Russia, and I've said that to his face, and if he comes on, I'll say it again to his face. So he goes on a tangent about how people are saying that this might be a Russian operation. You want to criticize that? I'm with you. I don't see any reason why this is a Russian operation. And so you've got to present evidence, and they haven't presented evidence of that. So if you wanted to make that point, that's not that controversial point at all, right? But then to turn around and make it seem like this is a giant land-breaking story right before the election, well, it misses the context so much that I fear that it becomes purposely misleading. So I'll give you an example, and it's the same one we've been talking about here, but in a different context, the Alex Morse case. So Alex Morse, a progressive candidate in Massachusetts, he's running against a terrible corporate Democrat. He was in the primary, and right before the election, a story got leaked about how Alex Morse was hitting on students at colleges, right? Alex happens to be gay, and so there was a little bit of a homophobic strain to that accusation as well. But the main accusation was, can you believe he's doing this, etc. And they have messages where he doesn't hit on them, but he says, how are you? It was good to see you at the student event, or whatever it was. We read you the messages earlier, they're perfectly benign. Now, you could run a story saying, Alex Morse sends messages to students right before his election and go, what? I thought they were verified. He did send messages. But wait a minute, that misleads your audience into thinking it's a giant scandal on par with what his opponent has done. And that's not remotely the case. At least within the story, you have to give it the outside context that gives you a sense of whether the story is important, whether it might be misleading, or it's something to look out for, but hasn't really fully developed yet. And I didn't get that sense from his story at all. I thought the editors were right to throw up a couple of red flags and say, Glenn, I think you should be careful with this.
Right, and look, I love that you mentioned that, this is not like a black and white story. Like, I feel like most of the discourse on social media is Glenn is 100% bad or 100% good and never makes any mistakes, or he's nothing but mistakes. He's done fantastic reporting, and I don't think that this takes away from that. But I do think that this particular story was like a weird thing for him to be so gung-ho about, even as he admitted himself that there's no evidence. So I'm gonna read you the part of the email exchange where Glenn admits that. He says to Peter Moss, and he posted this himself, I'm sorry. This is cited incorrectly, but this is actually the excerpts from Glenn Greenwald. He says, I believe I was quite careful not to say that the emails prove Biden had a corrupt motive. In fact, as you note, I explicitly say that the emails do not prove that. But if Biden caused the firing of a prosecutor, which, intended or not, ended up benefiting a company paying his son, then to me, it seems obvious that these new materials, including one suggesting Biden was going to meet with Burisma executives, along with other previously reported facts, raise questions about Biden's motives. So, there's this component of speculation in it and innuendo, and so that's what he wanted to publish, and that's what Peter Moss was apparently uncomfortable doing. So that disagreement was there. And I want to also just give you the perspective of Jeremy Scahill, who is still at The Intercept. He's one of the co-founders of The Intercept, and he says this: The Intercept aggressively reports on systematic injustice, war, corruption, and politics with a dedication to making a better world. It has a proven track record of holding those in power accountable regardless of political affiliation. I don't always agree with my colleagues, and I certainly don't agree with every story or viewpoint we publish, but I am proud of our journalism, and I am proud of the reporters and editors who work tirelessly to produce it. Glenn has alleged that he was censored by the editors of The Intercept. I do not agree with that characterization. From my admittedly limited involvement at Glenn's request with the specific article, it seemed to me that there was a reasonable path to publishing the piece. Glenn clearly disagreed with that and decided to withdraw from the process. People can look at the materials Glenn published and make their own judgment. From my perspective, the recent incident with the Biden article that was followed by Glenn's resignation was part of a much broader conflict and difference of opinion. And I think Scahill is 100% right about that. I think it's kind of obvious. You can see it from the outside as someone who's not part of that organization. And I hope that Glenn Greenwald does well over at Substack, and he continues publishing some of the hard-hitting journalism that's important to publish. And it sucks that this disagreement happened, but I do agree with the edits that Peter Moss wanted in this piece. I don't think that he was trying to censor him. I think they were just trying to make sure that they didn't publish anything that could be interpreted differently than what the truth is.
Yeah, and look, last couple of things I'll say. The innuendo is a big part of this, right? So sorry to keep using Alex Morse's example, mainly sorry to Alex, but in that case, you could have written a giant piece saying, oh my God, questions are raised about his behavior. And what has Alex Morse done with these students, et cetera. And then in the middle of a 17-page article, you could say, by the way, he actually didn't flirt with any of them. Yeah, but then why'd you write a 17-page article about it, insinuating that he did? And then in the middle of the article, as an aside, say, but he didn't. So, or there's no evidence that he did. I just, context matters. And as a journalist, you gotta know that context matters. So pretending that this is the biggest, like in my opinion, the lack of context makes it appear as if you think this is a giant story that has been proven, that you're going out there and writing this massive expose on. And I just don't think the facts merit that at all. And look, finally, we could all disagree about this, but I think the Russiagate folks have just, it's burrowed into their psyche in a way that is causing other problems, right? The minute Russia's mentioned in any story, both sides, the mainstream and the Russiagate people, or the people accusing everybody of doing Russiagate or whatever they are, will both immediately go into their corners. The mainstream goes, it's all Russia, it's definitely Russia, it might be Russia, and they do the innuendo, but worse. Glenn's right about that. And then the Russiagate people, and I'll go, Glenn and you know the rest of the list, right? The minute Russia's mentioned, no, it's not true. Everything in the story is not true. The opposite is true. Hold on. Maybe the Russia part isn't true, but let's look at the rest of the story with a clear eye. No, somebody mentioned Russia. I'm in a panic. And to me, this article screams of that as well. But the Russia part of this is minuscule. Why are you needlessly obsessing over it? And I'll tell you, I suspect, and I think this is also true of Glenn's, and again, I'm happy to have him on and talk it through and have him make his case, right? That some folks have gotten so obsessed with being contrarian that they've lost sight of what's true and not true. Not to say that they don't care about what's true or not true, but they're valuing being a courageous contrarian above being meticulous about the truth. Sometimes the truth is boring and it doesn't show you that you're courageous or that you're a hero. It's just the truth. And at this point, I think some folks have become so obsessed with one particular story that they let it affect almost everything else they do, with this giant goal of proving how courageous they are in the face of the windmills.
Yeah, look, Glenn Greenwald doesn't have to talk about Russia to show that he's courageous. I mean, he went up against Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, and that is not a small thing. I mean, he's been threatened, his family's been threatened. His partner is a politician in Brazil, and he's been threatened. I mean, it's terrifying. And so, yeah, I mean, this whole thing is uncomfortable and unfortunate, and there are parts of it that are frustrating to me personally because people want to see everything as black and white. And we need to understand that we're all flawed in some way. We all have our biases, but that doesn't mean that the good work that we've done is canceled as a result of that. Anyway, let's move on to other news because we do have some other stories, and I want to show you all how much Donald Trump really cares about his supporters. So Trump loves his supporters so much that he runs his campaign events the same way he runs the country, selfishly, with incompetence that's matched by no one. And that was certainly the case when over the weekend in 2 different campaign events, rally goers were abandoned. There weren't enough shuttles to get them back to their vehicles as they waited in cold temperatures. So this is the second and third time the Trump campaign has done this. Let's go to DJ Judd's tweet. And I don't think he's a real DJ. I think his first name is actually DJ. Not that that matters, but let me give you his tweet. He says, Trump has finished and left, but there's thousands of supporters who have been let loose into the night with no sign of the shuttles they've been told will take them back to parking. People are filling the streets, blocking the road for ambulances and police. So that is what the scene looked like in Pennsylvania, specifically over the weekend. It was 41 degrees in Pennsylvania that night. Now, the exact same thing happened in Georgia. Trump held a rally at the Richard B. Russell Regional Airport in Rome, Georgia on Sunday night. Thousands of people were bused to the event, but when it was over, there weren't nearly enough shuttle buses to accommodate everyone. Scores of people had to wait for transportation for hours in windy 46-degree weather. And so let's just take a quick look at the video featuring the Pennsylvania rallygoers.
A chaotic scene following the president's rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, north of Pittsburgh. It's dark and cold out there, and a lot of people who went to the rally got stuck in it. This is not the first time, as you may know. Just last week, the same thing happened after a Trump rally at the airport in Omaha, Nebraska. Supporters stranded in freezing cold as the president flew off on Air Force One. CNN's Ryan Nobles was there at this latest chilly scene when events tonight unfolded. What's the situation right now?
Well, Anderson, it appears the Trump campaign has now made an effort to get a number of buses to that location in Butler, Pennsylvania, to ferry the thousands of people that came to his rally here tonight. But it took quite a bit of time for that to happen. When we left the rally, it was a good 30 minutes after the president had lifted off on Marine One, and we walked into a logistical nightmare. There were thousands of people shoulder to shoulder, nowhere to go, no buses in sight, and no direction from anyone on the Trump campaign to tell them where to go or how to get back to their parking spots. And it became so frustrating for many of these Trump supporters that they ended up just walking. That is the decision that our crew made. My producer, DJ Judd, and I walked about a mile to get to our parking lot, found our car, and then when we started driving away, we spotted Trump supporters that were walking to their cars as much as 3 and 4 miles away from where the Trump rally was taking place.
I think DJ Judd is a super cool name. Anyway, Cenk, take it away.
Yeah. My ex-girlfriend, who was Jamaican, had a saying for this. It's called "ah good." I have zero sympathy for these folks. None whatsoever. Were some of you separated from your families? Oh, you didn't care when it happened to other people. You didn't care when the incompetence of Donald Trump led to us having the most cases and most deaths in the world in coronavirus, 230,000 dead Americans, and you're out there rallying for Trump. You're not just voting for, you're rallying for Trump. And so when his incompetence hits you, you'll excuse me if I don't shed a tear. So, and it's not, guys, incompetence is a giant problem for Trump that I've been talking about for 5 straight years. He doesn't care to do his homework, and in the fish rots from the head down in Scaramucci said. And so they never plan things out. That's why it's happening 3 different times. All right, let's bring everybody in to take the photo ops, the videos. Let's get that all over television. What are we gonna do afterwards? Nobody even asks because they're incompetent. They don't care. But that leads to the second point, which is lack of empathy. He probably thinks you're suckers and losers. He already used you for the photo op. What difference does it make what happens to you after he already got the video he needed to spread out across that state? Afterwards, you can freeze your ass off on your own time. Trump couldn't care less. And so, welcome to the rest of America, where this is how we've all been treated for the last 4 years.
Yeah, you mentioned the families that were separated at the border and how none of these Trump supporters shed a tear for them. In fact, they tried to justify it and served as apologists for it. Last Friday we did a story about how 40 immigrants have died in Border Patrol custody since 2017. 40. That is an insanely high number. And that barely even made it to the media's radar, to be quite honest with you. Like, it was kind of shocking how little attention that story got. And even knowing all of that, when we covered the first instance of Trump supporters being abandoned with a lack of shuttles and all that, I can't help but feel bad, and I kind of hate that part of me, because you read about some of the elderly people who showed up. One person got so sick in the cold that I don't know if it was a man or a woman, but they were in an altered state of mind and needed treatment in the hospital. And there were many others who needed treatment at the hospital as well, but that was the one person who suffered the most. Because Anna, at the end of the day, they're. Yeah,
I'll be the bad guy.
I get it. I get what you're saying. Trust me, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I'll be the bad guy.
I want to be a little more cutthroat too, Cenk.
No, first of all, if you're a Trump supporter, you're already in an altered state of mind. You went to a Trump rally in the middle of the freezing cold when you apparently have health issues. When the number one problem with Donald Trump is his inaction on health issues. And so you go out there like, yeah, no healthcare for anybody. Oh, I got sick. Somebody have sympathy for me. No, when you didn't have sympathy for anyone else, Don't come crying to us asking for sympathy now. And Anna's right, we're progressives. We're gonna treat you anyway. If we had it our way, you'd have healthcare coverage. You'd have any doctor you want. You'd have universal healthcare coverage and it would cost you less. That's what we're trying to get you. But you keep punching yourself in the face going, why am I bleeding from the nose? Because dude, you punch yourself in the face. We were trying to help you and stop you. But the great irony here is, by not sending the buses, Donald Trump might have accidentally actually overall helped their health. Why? They were all gonna crowd onto these buses where they were gonna all sit next to each other without masks, and since it's cold, they were gonna close the windows. Well, if one of them had coronavirus, almost everyone on that bus would get coronavirus. So even though it was uncomfortable, they were probably better off walking.
Yeah. All right, that does it for the show. We had one more story. I'll just tell you the good news. The GOP wanted to throw out 175,000 ballots from people who had voted through like this drive-by method that the state of Texas has done in order to accommodate for people, who don't want to get sick while they vote during a pandemic. Anyway, that got challenged over and over and over again by the GOP in the state of Texas. And today was the final ruling. And the Republican federal judge said, sorry, we're not going to throw out those ballots. So a little bit of a victory, which seems rare these days. Yeah, there's actually a bunch of good news stories from even Republican-held judiciary. There's federal ones, state ones, et cetera. But even the most diehard Republicans are like, no. There's a bunch of good Supreme Court decisions, 7-1 too, on non-election related stuff where they rebuffed a very conservative Fifth Circuit. That's why you saw earlier in the show Trump going, "It's a terrible decision by the Supreme Court. It's a terrible, terrible decision. They should let me cheat." The fact that some or a lot of conservative justices are saying, and judges are saying, no, you're not going to get to throw out the votes. That's a bridge too far. Whew, that's a significant. It's not over yet, and they could do a lot of things after the election too. But there's definitely some good news on that front. So, guys, tomorrow starts at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. It starts with Damage Report. I'll join John in the second hour. We're going to play some fun games. You got to share the stream. Damn, he wanted me for the first hour. Damn, Jank, what now? I'm on the first hour. I'm on the first hour. I'm on the first. Okay, anyway, just wanted to gloat about that a little bit.
Oh, okay. I see how Dragon Squad rolls. Okay, but seriously, guys, all day election day, and that magical moment, down goes. Wait for it. It's tomorrow. We'll see you then.